My name is Zora. I am 32 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful venture capital chief executive officer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling estate, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our massive home with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale yellow, at my mother Vivian's insistence, despite my preference for blue, became my sanctuary and my prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight. A grades, joined honor societies, and did everything to earn their love. None of it mattered because I was not my sister Nia. She was the golden child, the pageant queen, the perfect reflection of their high society obsession. My phone rang at exactly 6:15 in the morning. I was already awake, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown penthouse, looking out over the waking city. I saw my mother's name flash on the screen. Vivian never called this early unless she wanted to ruin my day. I pressed answer and brought the phone to my ear. "Honey, Grandpa died last night," my mother said coldly. There was no sadness in her voice. There was only a sharp, triumphant edge. "He left everything to your sister Nia and her husband Trey. You get absolutely nothing." Before I could even process the words, I heard my father Desmond laughing in the background. His laughter was a cruel, grating sound that brought back decades of rejection. "Finally, you are completely out of this family," Desmond yelled into the receiver. "We do not have to pretend to tolerate your existence anymore. You have always been a worthless embarrassment to our community standing." I simply smiled and pulled the phone away from my ear. I tapped the speaker button and set the device down on the marble kitchen island. I looked across the island. My grandfather Jeremiah, the legendary founder of a massive black-owned real estate empire in the South, was sitting right on a velvet bar stool. He was perfectly healthy, holding a ceramic mug and sipping his black coffee. He looked at the phone and his eyes narrowed with intense disappointment. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. "Vivian, Desmond, you two disappoint me much too early in the morning," Jeremiah said. His voice was deep, resonant, and completely steady. The dead silence on the other end of the line was absolute perfection. I could practically hear the oxygen leaving my parents' lungs. The triumphant energy they had just thrown at me evaporated into pure, unadulterated panic. "Dad," Vivian stammered. Her voice was suddenly high-pitched and trembling. "The hospital called us. Dr. Jenkins said your heart stopped. We saw the paperwork. This is a mistake. How are you speaking right now?" "Dr. Jenkins is my golf partner and has been for 30 years. Vivian," Jeremiah replied smoothly. "Did you really think I would not find out about your little scheme? You and Desmond have been plotting to liquidate my assets for 6 months. You thought you could bribe a night nurse to alter my medication chart and speed up my death. You thought I was just a blind old man waiting to die in a hospital bed. I faked my passing to see exactly how quickly you vultures would descend on my legacy. And you did not even wait for my body to go cold before you started celebrating." "Dad, please listen to me," Desmond begged. The arrogance in his voice was completely gone, replaced by pathetic desperation. "We only wanted to protect the family business. Zora does not know how to run a real estate empire. She is a stubborn failure who refused to follow your business model. We were securing the family name." "You do not know the first thing about securing a legacy," Desmond Jeremiah shot back. "You only know how to spend money you did not earn. You and Vivian care more about your standing at the country club and your front row seats at church than you do about your own blood. You just told your youngest daughter she is worthless. You showed me your true faces today." There was a frantic shuffling sound over the speaker. I imagined my mother pacing the floor of their grand foyer, pulling her hair in absolute terror. She always cared too much about appearances to handle failure gracefully. Zora, Jeremiah said, turning his attention to me. "Go to the estate for the will reading. I want you to go without me. I want you to look them in the eyes and see just how far their rot goes. Do not hold back. Show them exactly who they threw away." "I will handle them, Grandpa," I said quietly. I ended the call. The silence in my penthouse felt incredibly empowering. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I walked into my massive walk-in closet and selected a tailored charcoal gray suit. I wanted to look sharp, professional, and utterly untouchable. I slid my feet into black designer heels and grabbed my keys. My parents thought I was still a struggling low-level consultant because I never bothered to correct their assumptions. They thought I lived in a tiny apartment and scraped by on instant noodles. They had no idea that the venture capital firm I founded 7 years ago had recently crossed a $2 billion valuation. They had no idea that I pulled the strings behind the very banks they relied on to fund their extravagant lifestyles. I stepped out of my penthouse and took the private elevator down to the underground parking garage. My driver held the door open for me. I climbed into the back of my armored black sports utility vehicle. The leather seats were cool against my skin. As the heavy doors shut, sealing me in quiet luxury, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I was driving straight into the lion's den, but I was no longer the frightened prey. I was the apex predator, and I was about to dismantle their entire world brick by brick. The drive to the family estate took 45 minutes. I watched the Atlanta skyline fade into the wealthy, sprawling suburbs of Buckhead. Large mansions hid behind tall iron gates and perfectly manicured oak trees. This was the world my mother worshipped. She lived for the approval of her wealthy neighbors and her elite social circles. She judged everyone by the brand of their clothes and the prestige of their college degrees. Because I chose to forge my own path instead of riding on my grandfather's coattails, she deemed me a failure. She actively tried to erase me from the family narrative to ensure my sister Nia shined brighter. As my vehicle approached the massive wrought iron gates of the Jeremiah family estate, I saw a dozen luxury cars parked along the circular driveway. My parents wasted no time gathering their closest allies to celebrate their newly acquired wealth. I took a deep breath, feeling the satisfying weight of the documents in my leather briefcase. Today, the truth would come out. Today, the golden child and the arrogant parents would face the ultimate reckoning. I instructed my driver to park right behind my brother-in-law Trey's flashy red sports car. I stepped out of the vehicle, the crisp morning air hitting my face. I walked up the grand stone steps and pushed the heavy mahogany front doors open without knocking. The game was officially on. The extravagant foyer was completely silent, but I could hear voices coming from the main living room. They were already drinking champagne and laughing about how rich they were about to become. I straightened my suit jacket and walked purposefully down the long hallway. My heels clicked loudly against the imported Italian marble floor, announcing my arrival like a ticking clock. The moment I stepped into the living room, the laughter died instantly. Nia was holding a crystal flute filled with expensive champagne. Trey stood beside her wearing a designer suit that I knew he could not afford. My parents, Vivian and Desmond, sat on the velvet sofa looking incredibly nervous. They had not yet told Nia and Trey about the phone call with Grandpa Jeremiah. They were trying to keep the facade alive for just a few more hours, hoping they could somehow force me to sign away my rights before the truth exploded in their faces. "What are you doing here?" Zora, Nia sneered. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. "Mom specifically told you that you were entirely cut out of the will. You have no business being in this house. This gathering is for the actual heirs of the family empire." "I am here because I received a formal invitation from the estate lawyer," I replied smoothly. I walked further into the room, making sure to take up space. I noticed the extravagant breakfast spread they had ordered from a high-end catering service. They were spending money they did not even have yet. Trey stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to intimidate me. "You need to leave right now, Zora," he demanded. "We do not want your negative energy ruining our celebration. You always bring everyone down with your bad attitude and your cheap clothes. Go wait in the kitchen if you insist on staying. We will call you when we have some scraps to hand out." I looked Trey up and down, taking in his expensive watch and his custom leather shoes. "You have a lot of nerve talking about cheap clothes, Trey," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I remember a time when you could not even afford to buy a value meal at a fast food restaurant. In fact, the only reason you are wearing that Rolex right now is because Vivian kicked me out of this house 7 years ago and drained my entire college savings account to pay for your failing application startup. You built your fake millionaire lifestyle on stolen money. Section 2, exactly 1,500 words. Trey flushed bright red. He took another step toward me, raising his voice. That was a legitimate business investment, he shouted. Your mother knew I had potential. She knew you were going to fail anyway, so she made a smart financial decision. I am a successful entrepreneur now, and you are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot accept her own mediocrity. I smiled, leaning closer to him. A successful entrepreneur, I repeated mockingly. Is that what you call yourself these days, Trey? Because from what I hear, your company has not generated a single dollar of actual profit in over 3 years. You survive by taking out massive loans and moving debt from one shell company to another. You are a walking financial disaster wearing a nice suit. Nia gasped, slamming her champagne glass down on the table. Do not you dare speak to my husband that way, she screamed. He is 10 times the person you will ever be. You are just jealous because I got the perfect marriage, the perfect life, and the entire family inheritance. You have always been jealous of me, Zora. Ever since we were kids, you tried to compete with me and you always lost. I turned my attention to my sister, the golden child who had never worked a hard day in her life. Jealous of you, Nia, I asked softly. Why would I be jealous of a woman whose entire identity depends on the approval of a mother who only loves her when she obeys? You are a puppet, Nia. You wear the clothes they tell you to wear, you married the man they told you to marry, and you live the life they scripted for you. You have never made an independent choice in your entire existence. Vivian jumped up from the sofa, her face contorted with rage. Shut your mouth, Zora, she commanded. You have no right to come into my home and insult my family. We gave you everything and you threw it all away because you were too proud to follow our rules. You brought this isolation upon yourself. We are done dealing with your disrespect. Just then, the heavy wooden doors of the study opened. A tall, balding man in a gray suit walked into the room carrying a thick stack of legal documents. It was Mr. Bradley, the corrupt family lawyer, who had been helping my parents scheme behind my grandfather's back. He looked nervously at my parents, then adjusted his glasses. Ah, Zora, you are here, Mr. Bradley said, his voice lacking any real warmth. Excellent. We can begin the proceedings immediately. Please, everyone, take a seat. We have some urgent matters to discuss regarding the immediate transfer of the estate assets. I did not sit down. I remained standing right in the center of the room, watching as my family scrambled to take their places on the luxurious furniture. They looked like vultures waiting for a carcass to be served on a silver platter. They had no idea that I was about to serve them their own destruction. Mr. Bradley cleared his throat, opening the first folder. As you all know, Jeremiah has passed away. According to the documents presented to me by Vivian and Desmond, the family business is currently facing severe financial challenges. In fact, the estate is drowning in $20 million of corporate debt due to some unfortunate market fluctuations and aggressive expansion strategies. Nia and Trey looked shocked. Wait, what debt? Nia asked, her voice trembling. Mom, you said we were inheriting billions. You said we were going to be rich. Vivian shot a warning glare at the lawyer, then turned to her precious daughter with a fake reassuring smile. Do not worry, sweetheart, she cooed. We have a plan. Everything is completely under control. We just need to handle some minor administrative paperwork today to clear the debt and secure your future. Desmond stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. And it is all her fault, he declared loudly, making sure everyone in the room heard him. The only reason the family business is in debt is because Zora selfishly refused to co-sign a critical corporate loan for us 3 years ago. She purposely sabotaged our credit rating out of spite. She wanted to see us fail. I stared at my father, completely disgusted by his willingness to lie to protect his fragile ego. I refused to co-sign that loan because I knew you were going to use the money to cover up your illegal gambling losses. Desmond, I said clearly. I was not going to let you ruin my financial standing to clean up your messy mistakes. You destroyed this family long before today. Vivian slammed a document onto the glass coffee table right in front of me. She grabbed a pen and shoved it toward my chest. Enough talking, she demanded. This is a legally binding waiver of inheritance. It states that you forfeit any and all claims to the family estate effective immediately. If you sign it right now, Trey has a private equity investor who is willing to buy out our debt and save the company. If you refuse to sign, We will have security physically drag you out of this house, and we will sue you for damages. Pick up the pen and sign it, Zora, now." I looked down at the document. It was completely fraudulent, designed to rob me of the protection my grandfather had legally established for me. I picked up the pen. Nia smiled triumphantly, leaning against Trey's shoulder. She thought she had won. She thought I was finally submitting to their control. Instead of signing my name, I placed the pen right in the center of the document and applied pressure. With a loud crack, I snapped the pen entirely in half. Black ink spilled over the crisp white paper, staining the fraudulent waiver. "Are you out of your mind?" Desmond roared, taking a threatening step toward me. His fists were clenched tight. "You do not disrespect us in this house. You sign that paper right now, or I swear to God, I will make you regret ever walking back through those front doors. You have been a disgrace to the Black elite community of Atlanta since the day you were born." Trey immediately stepped between us, playing the role of the arrogant savior. He held up his hands, gesturing for everyone to calm down. "Let me handle this," he said smoothly, flashing a fake corporate smile. "Listen, Zora, you clearly do not understand how high-level business works. My tech firm just secured a massive buyout deal from a gigantic private equity conglomerate called Apex Holdings. They are willing to clear this $20 million debt, but only if every single family member signs over their rights. They demand absolute control. If you do not sign this waiver, you are personally blocking a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition. You will bankrupt your own parents." I stared at Trey, letting his absolute foolishness hang in the air for a moment. I slowly reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I looked directly into his desperate, greedy eyes. "Apex Holdings," I repeated, letting a slow, genuine laugh escape my lips. "That is incredibly funny, Trey. Let us see what Apex Holdings actually thinks of your brilliant business proposal." I tapped my screen and pressed play. A frantic crying voice echoed from my phone speaker, filling the grand living room with undeniable proof of Trey's absolute failure. It was a recording I had acquired just 48 hours ago. "Please, man, you have to give me more time," Trey's voice cried out through the audio file. His tone was pathetic, completely stripped of the confident swagger he had displayed moments ago. "My tech firm is completely underwater. It is just a shell company. I do not have the money to pay back what I owe you for the offshore gambling debts. But listen, my wife is inheriting her grandfather's entire real estate empire this week. I am going to forge a corporate buyout and drain the family accounts. I will pay you back every single cent, I swear. Just do not break my legs. I have a plan." I pressed pause, stopping the audio right, as Trey began to sob on the recording. The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched the blood drain completely from Trey's face. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Nia stumbled backward, as if she had been physically struck. She looked at her husband with pure, unadulterated horror. "You lied to me," Nia screamed, her voice breaking. "You told me your company was worth $50 million. You told me we were buying a private jet next month. You are trying to steal my inheritance to pay off loan sharks." Vivian and Desmond were completely paralyzed. Their perfect son-in-law, the man they had chosen over their own daughter, was nothing but a desperate broke criminal trying to rob them blind. Vivian started hyperventilating, clutching her pearl necklace as she realized the church community would inevitably find out about this humiliating disaster. "This is a fake!" Vivian shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You edited that audio, Zora. You are trying to frame him because you are jealous. You have always been a manipulative liar. I will not let you destroy my daughter's marriage." I did not flinch. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents stamped heavily with red ink. I tossed them onto the table right over the ink-stained waiver. "Actually, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "Apex Holdings did not approve Trey's buyout proposal because I did not approve it." I pulled out my exclusive ultra-rare titanium black card and dropped it onto the table. The heavy metal clinked sharply against the glass. "I do not work for Apex Holdings, Trey," I said, looking directly into his terrified eyes. "I am the founder and the chief executive officer, and as of 8 o'clock this morning, my firm officially bought your $20 million debt from the bank. I own your loans. I own your fraudulent tech company. I own you." The heavy wooden double doors of the estate stood slightly open. I pushed them wide and walked into the grand foyer. The familiar scent of fresh lilies and expensive floor wax hit me instantly. Everything in this house was designed to project wealth and superiority. I heard loud laughter echoing from the main living room. I followed the sound, my designer heels clicking sharply against the imported Italian marble floor. The noise of my arrival served as a warning bell, but they were too absorbed in their own greed to notice. I stepped into the living room and surveyed the scene. My sister Nia was draped across a velvet sofa holding a crystal flute filled with expensive champagne. She wore a bright red designer dress that screamed for attention. Her husband Trey stood beside the marble fireplace. He held a matching champagne glass and wore a custom-tailored suit that I knew he could not afford. They were already celebrating a victory they had not yet won. The spread on the dining table featured imported caviar and fresh pastries from the most expensive caterer in Atlanta. They were spending Grandpa's money before his body was even buried. The moment Nia saw me, her laughter stopped abruptly. She set her champagne flute down so hard the crystal almost shattered. "What are you doing here, Zora?" she sneered. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. "Mom specifically told you that you were entirely cut out of the will. You have no business being in this house. This gathering is for the actual heirs of the family empire, not the black sheep who ran away." I walked further into the room, making sure to take up space. "I am here because I received a formal invitation from the estate lawyer," I replied smoothly. I kept my voice completely level, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she desperately craved. Nia stood up and crossed her arms. Her eyes raked over my charcoal gray suit with obvious disdain. "You always show up looking so plain and rigid," she insulted. "You never lived up to the pageant queen standards of our family. You lack the grace and the elegance required to carry our legacy. You dress like a struggling intern who buys clothes off the clearance rack. You are an embarrassment to our entire historically black college alumni network." Trey stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to intimidate me. He swirled the champagne in his glass and gave me a condescending look. "You need to leave right now, Zora," he demanded. "We do not want your negative energy ruining our celebration. You always bring everyone down with your bad attitude and your cheap aesthetic. Go wait in the kitchen if you insist on staying. We will call you when the lawyer arrives, and maybe we will have some leftover pastries to hand out to you." He pointed his finger toward the hallway leading to the staff quarters. The absolute arrogance radiating from him was almost comical. He truly believed he was the master of this domain. He truly believed he had won. I looked Trey up and down, taking in his expensive gold watch and his polished leather shoes. "You have a lot of nerve talking about cheap clothes and negative energy, Trey," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I remember a time when you could not even afford to buy a value meal at a fast food restaurant. In fact, the only reason you are wearing that Rolex right now is because of me." Trey flushed bright red and opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off instantly. "Do not interrupt me," I commanded. "The only reason you have any semblance of a career is because Vivian kicked me out of this house 7 years ago. She drained my entire college savings account to pay for your failing application startup. You built your fake millionaire lifestyle on my stolen money. You are a walking financial disaster wearing a nice suit." Nia gasped loudly. "Do not you dare speak to my husband that way," she screamed. "He is 10 times the person you will ever be. That was a legitimate business investment, and Mom knew you were going to fail anyway. You are just jealous, because I got the perfect marriage, the perfect life, and the entire family inheritance." Nia continued, her voice shrill and frantic. "You have always been jealous of me, Zora. Ever since we were kids, you tried to compete with me and you always lost." I turned my attention to my sister, the golden child who had never worked a hard day in her life. "Jealous of you, Nia?" I asked softly. "Why would I be jealous of a woman whose entire identity depends on the approval of a mother who only loves her when she obeys? You are a puppet, Nia. You wear the clothes they tell you to wear. You married the man they told you to marry, and you live the life they scripted for you. You have never made an independent choice in your entire existence. You traded your freedom for an illusion of security, and you call that winning." The truth hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled backward as if she could not bear the weight of my words. Before Nia could formulate a response, The heavy double doors of the grand study swung open. My father, Desmond, and my mother, Vivian, marched into the living room. They were accompanied by a tall, balding man in a gray suit who carried a thick leather briefcase. This was Mr. Bradley, the corrupt family lawyer who had been helping my parents scheme behind my grandfather's back. Vivian glared at me, her eyes blazing with absolute fury. She wore a dramatic black dress, as if she were mourning, but her face was flushed with greedy excitement. "Shut your mouth," Zora, Vivian commanded. "You have no right to come into my home and insult my family. We gave you everything and you threw it all away because you were too proud to follow our rules. You brought this isolation upon yourself. We are done dealing with your disrespect." Desmond stood beside her, nodding in agreement. "You are a disgrace to the black elite community of Atlanta," Desmond added loudly. "We built a reputation of excellence and you did nothing but tarnish it." Mr. Bradley cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. He looked nervously at my parents, then set his briefcase down on the glass coffee table. "Ah, Zora, you are here," Mr. Bradley said, his voice lacking any real warmth. "Excellent. We can begin the proceedings immediately. Please everyone take a seat. We have some urgent matters to discuss regarding the immediate transfer of the estate assets." I did not sit down. I remained standing right in the center of the room, watching as my family scrambled to take their places on the luxurious furniture. They looked like vultures waiting for a carcass to be served on a silver platter. Vivian grabbed a document from Mr. Bradley's briefcase and slammed it onto the glass coffee table right in front of me. She grabbed a heavy fountain pen and shoved it toward my chest. "Enough talking," she demanded. "This is a legally binding waiver of inheritance. It states that you forfeit any and all claims to the family estate, effective immediately. If you sign it right now, Trey has a private equity investor who is willing to step in and save the family business. If you refuse to sign, we will have security physically drag you out of this house and we will sue you for damages. Pick up the pen and sign away your rights, Zora. Now." I looked down at the document resting on the glass table. It was completely fraudulent, designed to rob me of the protection my grandfather had legally established for me. Desmond crossed his arms and glared at me. "Do not make this harder than it has to be, Zora," he threatened. "We have security guards waiting right outside that door. You are outmatched, and you are entirely out of options. Just sign the paper and walk away before you embarrass yourself even further." Nia smiled triumphantly, leaning against Trey's shoulder. She truly thought she had won. She thought I was finally submitting to their control. They all believed I was the same frightened girl they had kicked out into the cold 7 years ago. They thought they held all the power in this room. But they were wrong. I looked up from the waiver and met my mother's furious gaze. I reached out and slowly picked up the heavy fountain pen from them. I held the heavy fountain pen in my hand, letting the cool metal rest against my palm. Mr. Bradley cleared his throat again, adjusting his tie as he prepared to deliver the final blow. He opened a secondary folder and pulled out a stack of financial statements, spreading them across the glass coffee table alongside the waiver. "As I mentioned, the estate is currently facing a catastrophic liquidity crisis," Mr. Bradley said. His voice was overly practiced projecting a false sense of professional sympathy. "Over the past 5 years, Desmond and Vivian leveraged several key commercial properties to fund rapid expansion projects. Unfortunately, those investments did not yield the projected returns. The family empire is currently drowning in exactly $20 million of corporate debt. The primary lenders have issued their final notices. They are preparing to seize everything by the end of the month." Vivian slammed her hands down on the armrests of her chair. She glared at me with a hatred so pure it practically burned the air between us. "And it is all your fault, Zora," she screamed, her perfectly manicured facade completely shattered. "We would not be in this position if you had just done your duty to this family. 3 years ago, we asked you to co-sign a simple bridge loan to secure our assets. We asked you to leverage your personal credit to help us stay afloat. But you were too selfish. You refused to help your own flesh and blood. You purposely sabotaged our financial standing out of sheer spite. You wanted to see us fail because you were jealous of your sister." I stared at my mother, completely disgusted by her willingness to rewrite history to protect her own fragile ego. I refused to co-sign that loan because I knew exactly what you were going to do with the money, I replied, my voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. You were not trying to save the family business, Vivian. You and Desmond were trying to cover up your massive gambling debts and your reckless spending habits. You wanted me to chain myself to a sinking ship so you could continue hosting lavish country club dinners and pretending you were still the royalty of Atlanta. You destroyed this family long before today. I was not going to let you drag me down to the bottom of the ocean with you. Desmond shot up from his seat, his face flushed with rage. How dare you speak to your mother that way, he bellowed. His chest heaved as he pointed a trembling finger at my face. We gave you a life of luxury. We gave you a name that commands respect in every room in this city. You are a disgrace to the Black elite community of Atlanta. You have been a profound disappointment since the day you were born. Pick up that pen and sign the waiver right now. You owe us your life, and you will surrender your rights to this estate today. I looked down at the fraudulent waiver resting on the table. I looked at the heavy fountain pen in my hand. Nia smiled triumphantly from the sofa, leaning her head against Trey's shoulder. She truly thought she had won. She thought the combined weight of their intimidation would crush my spirit, just like it always did when I was a teenager. They all believed I was still the frightened, isolated girl they had thrown out into the cold 7 years ago. They thought they held all the power in this room. I gripped the ends of the expensive fountain pen with both hands. I did not sign my name. Instead, I applied pressure right to the center of the metal barrel. With a sharp and incredibly satisfying crack, I snapped the pen entirely in half. Black ink exploded from the ruptured cartridge, splashing violently across the crisp white paper of the waiver. The dark liquid pooled over the signature line, completely ruining the fraudulent document they had spent months carefully preparing. Nia shrieked, pulling her legs up onto the sofa to avoid the splashing ink. Vivian gasped, clutching her chest as if she was having a heart attack. Are you completely out of your mind? Desmond roared, taking a highly aggressive step toward me. His fists were clenched tight by his sides, and the veins in his neck bulged visibly. You do not disrespect us in this house. You do not destroy our legal property. You will sign a fresh copy right now, or I swear to God, I will have the security team drag you out of here by your hair. You are outmatched, Zora. You have no money, no power, and no allies. You are entirely out of options. Before Desmond could take another step toward me, Trey immediately stepped directly between us, playing the role of the arrogant savior. He held up his hands, gesturing for my furious father to calm down. Let me handle this, Desmond Trey said smoothly. He flashed a fake corporate smile and adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit. He turned to face me, looking down his nose with an expression of absolute superiority. Listen to me, Zora Trey began, his voice dripping with intense condescension. You clearly do not understand how high-level corporate business works. You have been scraping by at the bottom of the barrel for so long that you cannot see the bigger picture. My tech firm has just secured a massive multi-million-dollar buyout deal from a gigantic private equity conglomerate. They are called Apex Holdings. They are a multi-billion-dollar firm operating out of New York, and they have agreed to acquire my company for a staggering valuation. Trey paused, pacing slowly in front of the coffee table, acting as if he were delivering a keynote speech to a room full of eager investors. As part of this acquisition deal, Trey continued, Apex Holdings is willing to clear this entire $20 million family debt. They will wipe the slate clean and save the family business from total bankruptcy. But they have one strict condition. They demand absolute control over the estate assets before they transfer a single cent. They require every single family member to sign away their inheritance rights completely and without question. If you do not sign a new copy of this waiver, you are personally blocking a massive corporate acquisition. You will single-handedly bankrupt your own parents and destroy the legacy your grandfather built. You need to stop throwing a childish tantrum and let the real adults handle the business. I stared at Trey, letting his absolute foolishness hang in the heavy air for a long moment. He stood there, puffing out his chest, genuinely believing he was the smartest person in the room. He truly thought his web of corporate buzzwords would intimidate me into submission. He thought the name of a massive private equity firm would send me running for the hills. He had absolutely no idea who he was talking to. I slowly reached into my tailored blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I looked directly into Trey's desperate, greedy eyes. I let a slow, genuine laugh escape my lips. The sound echoed through the grand living room, carrying a chilling sense of absolute authority. Apex Holdings, I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. That is incredibly funny, Trey. It really is a fascinating story you have constructed. A multi-million-dollar buyout from a massive private equity conglomerate to save the family real estate empire. It sounds like the perfect fairy tale ending for a man who desperately needs to play the hero today. Trey frowned, his confident facade cracking just a fraction of an inch. What is so funny? Funny, he demanded, his voice losing its smooth corporate polish entirely. This is a legitimate acquisition, Zora. You cannot comprehend the scale of this transaction because you have never seen real wealth in your entire pathetic life. Oh, I understand the scale perfectly well, Trey, I replied, taking a deliberate step closer to him. I understand exactly what kind of transaction you are attempting to execute today. But since you are so incredibly confident in your grand business strategy, let us see what Apex Holdings actually thinks of your brilliant proposal. I tapped the screen of my smartphone, opening my secure audio files. I turned the media volume all the way up to its maximum level. I held the phone up so everyone in the room could see the screen. Let us listen to the truth, Trey, I said coldly. Let us hear exactly how high-level corporate business works in your world. I looked at Nia, watching her smug smile begin to slowly fade into absolute uncertainty. I took one final deep breath, savoring the exact moment their entire false reality began to crumble around them. Then I pressed play on the audio file. The sharp crackle of static filled the sprawling living room, followed immediately by the sound of ragged, heavy breathing. It was Trey's voice, but it possessed none of the smooth, arrogant confidence he had displayed just seconds prior. Instead, he sounded like a cornered animal pleading for his miserable life. Please, man, you have to give me a few more days, Trey's recorded voice begged through my phone speaker. The sheer terror in his tone was undeniable. My tech firm is completely underwater. It is nothing but a worthless shell company. I do not have the cash to cover the offshore gambling debts right now. But you have to believe me, I have a foolproof plan. Another voice, deep and menacing, responded on the recording. I do not care about your startup, Trey. I care about my money. You owe us $5 million. If we do not see a wire transfer by Friday, we are going to start breaking bones. No, please listen to me, Trey sobbed on the recording. His desperation was pathetic to witness. My wife is inheriting her grandfather's massive real estate empire this week. The legal paperwork is already in motion. I am setting up a fake corporate buyout. I am going to drain their entire family trust and sell off every single property they own. I will pay you back every single cent with interest. I am taking everything they have. Just do not hurt me. I reached out and tapped the screen, ending the recording. The silence that slammed into the room was heavier than solid concrete. I watched the blood drain entirely from Trey's face. His tan complexion turned an ashen gray. His jaw hung open, but his meticulously crafted corporate vocabulary completely failed him. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into the glass coffee table. Nia stood frozen beside the velvet sofa, her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked at the smartphone in my hand and then slowly turned her gaze toward her husband. The golden child who had spent her entire life parading her flawless relationship in front of our church congregation was watching her fairy tale burn to ashes. You lied to me, Nia shrieked. The sound was deafening, tearing through the elegant room like a loud siren. You told me your company was worth $50 million. You told me we were closing on a mansion in the Hamptons next month. You are completely broke. You are trying to steal my inheritance to pay off violent loan sharks. Nia lunged at him. She slammed her fists against his tailored chest, beating him with frantic, erratic strikes. She screamed about the humiliation, about the fake designer bags he bought her, about the sheer embarrassment of being married to a poor, broke criminal. Trey held up his hands, trying to deflect her blows, but he looked completely, utterly defeated. He was a fraud exposed in the harshest light possible. Vivian and Desmond sat paralyzed on the sofa. The reality of the situation crashed over them in devastating waves. Their perfect son-in-law, the man they had elevated above their own daughter, was nothing but a desperate parasite plotting to rob them blind and leave them destitute. But true to their toxic nature, my parents did not confront the actual threat. Vivian jumped up, grabbing Nia by the shoulders and pulling her away from Trey. Her eyes darted wildly toward the very closed living room doors, terrified that the household staff might overhear the commotion. "Stop screaming," Nia, Vivian hissed, shaking my sister. "Keep your voice down. Do you have any idea what will happen if the pastor hears about this? If the ladies at the country club find out my son-in-law is a degenerate gambler swimming in illegal debt, we will be absolute laughingstocks. We will be ruined in this community. Pull yourself together right now." Desmond rubbed his chest heaving with panicked breaths. "We can fix this," Desmond muttered, frantically pacing the floor. "We just need to keep this quiet. We need to secure the entire estate assets and quietly handle Trey's debt before the creditors seize the commercial properties. We cannot let a scandal leak." I stood there watching their pathetic display of misplaced priorities. They were moments away from losing their entire generational wealth to a con artist, and their primary concern was what the women at their Sunday service would think. It was the level of superficiality that disgusted me down to my very core. Vivian suddenly turned her wrath toward me. Her eyes blazed with a desperate manic fury. She just pointed a trembling manicured finger straight at my chest. "This is a fabrication!" Vivian screamed, her voice echoing sharply. "You edited that audio file, Zora. You used some cheap artificial intelligence software to fake Trey's voice. You are trying to frame him because you have always been brutally jealous of your sister. You want to destroy her marriage because you are a lonely, miserable failure who cannot stand to see anyone else happy." Desmond quickly latched onto the delusion. "Of course," he shouted, nodding vigorously. "It is a deepfake. You are trying to extort us. You staged this entire performance to stop the Apex Holdings buyout so you could extort money from us. You are a sick, manipulative liar, Zora. I will have the police arrest you for blackmail." Trey, sensing a lifeline, immediately played along. "Yes," he gasped, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It is a fake. She is lying, Desmond. I swear on my life my tech firm is legitimate. The Apex Holdings deal is real. They are wiring the funds tomorrow as soon as you force her to sign that waiver. She is just trying to sabotage the family business out of spite." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my very structured leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of documents. The pages were bound tightly and stamped heavily with bright red official ink. I tossed the entire stack onto the glass coffee table right over the ink-stained waiver they had tried to force me to sign. "Actually, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper, "Apex Holdings did not approve Trey's desperate buyout proposal because I did not approve it." Vivian stopped breathing. Desmond stared at the thick stack of legal documents, his eyes very wide with confusion. The red stamps on the paperwork clearly bore the official seals of top-tier financial regulators and banking institutions. They were undeniable proof of a massive corporate acquisition. "What are you talking about?" Desmond demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of his own sudden uncertainty. "What does Apex Holdings have to do with your petty consulting work? You have never been involved in high-level corporate acquisitions. You are just trying to confuse us with meaningless paperwork to buy yourself some time." Vivian stepped forward, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "She is bluffing, Desmond. Do not let her manipulate you. She probably printed those fake documents at a cheap local copy shop. She is just trying to ruin our day because she knows she has lost everything." I looked at my parents, feeling a strange mixture of pity and absolute triumph. "You have spent your entire lives judging people by their appearances," I said calmly. "You judged me because I refused to wear the expensive clothes you bought me. You judged me because I wanted to build something real instead of pretending to be perfect. You looked at Trey and saw a designer suit and a flashy car, and you blindly handed him the keys to the family empire. You never once bothered to look beneath the surface. You never bothered to verify if his wealth was actually real. And now your desperate need for social validation has cost you absolutely everything. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. I pulled out an exclusive ultra-rare titanium black card. It was the kind of financial instrument reserved solely for the absolute top percentile of global wealth. It was a card you could not apply for. You had to be invited by the banking elite. I dropped the heavy metal card directly down onto the glass table. It landed heavily with a sharp, definitive clink that seemed to echo forever in the silent room. I looked directly into Trey's terrified, bulging eyes. I let a cold, predatory smile touch my lips. "I do not work for Apex Holdings, Trey," I said, articulating every single syllable with lethal precision. "I am the founder and the chief executive officer. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, my venture capital firm officially bought your $20 million debt from the central bank. I own your defaulted loans. I own your fraudulent shell company. I own every single asset you possess. I truly own you." The grand living room erupted into pure, unfiltered chaos. The pristine facade my parents had spent decades building shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of my eyes. Trey let out a guttural, desperate sound that was half scream and half sob. His entire body shook violently as the reality of his total financial destruction settled over him. He had lost everything. He was a fraud exposed, and now he belonged to me. "You cannot do this to me," Trey yelled, launching himself forward. His hands curled into tight, aggressive fists as he lunged directly across the glass coffee table, aiming straight for my throat. He was entirely out of his mind, operating on pure, frantic adrenaline. He truly believed he could physically intimidate me into surrendering the titanium black card. He completely underestimated the level of preparation I brought to this confrontation. Before Trey could even clear the edge of the table, two massive figures stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. My private security detail. They had silently followed me into the house and had been waiting just out of sight for exactly this kind of escalation. The first guard grabbed Trey by the collar of his expensive tailored suit, twisting the fabric tightly. With a single effortless motion, he slammed Trey hard against the silk wallpapered wall. The impact rattled the framed family portraits hanging nearby. Trey's custom jacket tore loudly at the shoulder seam as the guard pinned him securely, holding him completely immobile. Trey thrashed and kicked his expensive leather shoes, scraping uselessly against the marble floor. "Get your hands off my husband," Nia shrieked, dropping her champagne flute. The crystals shattered into sharp, glittering shards across the floor. She lunged forward, trying to pry the security guard's thick arm away from Trey's chest, but the guard simply ignored her, swatting her away like a minor nuisance. Vivian screamed, clutching her chest. "Desmond, you have to stop this," she yelled, her voice hysterical. "Call the police immediately. She is assaulting him in our own home." Desmond did not move. He stood completely frozen, staring blankly at the titanium black card resting on the glass table. His jaw hung slack. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of absolute terror and profound, sickening realization. He was a man who worshipped wealth above all else. He respected money more than he respected his own flesh and blood. And in that single devastating moment, he realized that his worthless failure of a daughter, the child he had kicked out into the street, was actually a legitimate billionaire. He realized that I wielded more financial power in my single hand than his entire family lineage combined. His immense patriarchal pride did not just break, it disintegrated completely. "Zora," Desmond whispered, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the words. You are the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings. You are the private equity investor who bought our debt. How is this even possible? You are just a struggling student. You had nothing when you left. I had nothing because you took everything from me, Desmond," I replied, my tone completely devoid of any sympathy. "You took my college fund to pay for Trey's failing startup. You took my home. You took my family name. But you forgot one crucial detail. I am the only person in this room who actually knows how to work. I took the scraps you left me, and I built an empire while you were busy playing golf and pretending to be rich. I own your loans now, and I am calling them in immediately. You have until Friday to vacate this estate before my firm formally forecloses on the property. Nia's head snapped toward me. The panic in her eyes was sudden and raw. She looked at Trey, who was still pinned against the wall, looking pathetic and broken. Then she looked at the titanium black card on the table. I watched the gears turning in her calculating mind. Nia had spent her entire life surviving by manipulating the people around her. She was a chameleon, always shifting her colors to align with whoever held the most power. Right now, I held all the power. Nia instantly switched sides. She turned her back on her husband without a second's hesitation. He lied to me, Zora. Nia cried out, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured tears. She clasped her hands together, pressing them against her chest as she played the ultimate victim. I swear to God, I had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Trey told me his business was booming. He told me he was a self-made millionaire. He manipulated me just like he manipulated Mom and Dad. He is a monster, Zora. Please, you have to believe me. Nia took a cautious step toward me, her eyes wide and pleading. I am your sister, Zora, she sobbed, reaching out to lightly touch my sleeve. You cannot foreclose on the estate. You cannot throw me out onto the street. I need this family money more than ever right now. I am pregnant, Zora. I am pregnant with twins. I need the inheritance to provide for my babies, because this worthless criminal clearly cannot provide anything. Please, Zora, you have to share the wealth. We are family. Blood is thicker than water. I stared at Nia, letting her pathetic performance hang in the air. I saw the desperate calculation in her eyes. She thought playing the pregnancy card would automatically trigger some deep-seated sisterly affection. She thought she could manipulate me into funding her luxurious lifestyle, just like she manipulated our parents for decades. I gently but firmly brushed her hand off my sleeve. I stepped back, creating a clear physical boundary between us. Blood is thicker than water, I repeated, my voice dripping with absolute sarcasm. That is a very convenient philosophy, Nia. It is funny how blood only matters when you are the one begging for a handout. It did not matter 7 years ago when you watched Vivian throw my belongings onto the driveway in the freezing rain. It did not matter when you spent my stolen college tuition on a luxury vacation to the Maldives. I am so sorry about that, Nia cried, forcing more tears down her perfectly contoured cheeks. I was young and stupid. Mom controlled everything. But things are different now. I am going to be a mother. I need your help, Zora. You cannot punish my innocent unborn twins for the mistakes of the past. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. I reached into my leather briefcase for the second time. I pulled out a slender manila folder. I held it up, letting the harsh overhead lighting catch the crisp edges of the paper. Twins, I said, raising an eyebrow. That is a truly fascinating medical miracle, Nia, especially considering your recent travel history. I tossed the folder onto the table right next to the titanium black card. The folder fell open, revealing a stack of highly detailed medical receipts and clinical photographs. Nia's fake tears stopped instantly. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She stared at the open folder, her mouth opening and closing in silent panic. Let us talk about your miraculous pregnancy, Nia, I said, my voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. You have always been incredibly creative when it comes to extorting money from this family. 3 years ago, you faked a miscarriage to convince Grandpa Jeremiah to buy you a $2 million condo in Buckhead for emotional recovery. 2 years ago, you faked a high-risk pregnancy complication to get Vivian to wire you $50,000 for specialized holistic treatments. You have weaponized motherhood to drain their bank accounts for years. Vivian gasped, taking a step toward her precious golden child. Nia, what is she talking about? Vivian asked, her voice trembling. You sent me the ultrasound pictures just last week. I did not let Nia answer. Those ultrasound pictures were purchased from a desperate nurse on the internet, Vivian. I stated clearly, pointing to the documents on the table. Nia is not pregnant with twins. She is not pregnant at all. In fact, according to these incredibly detailed clinical receipts, she spent the last 2 weeks visiting a highly exclusive plastic surgeon down in Miami. I tapped the top document with my manicured fingernail. She was not consulting an OB/GYN. She was receiving a premium specialized tummy tuck and extensive liposuction. She charged the entire $75,000 procedure to Desmond's corporate credit card, claiming it was for emergency prenatal care. She is bleeding you dry and laughing behind your backs. Nia let out a high-pitched shriek. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the medical receipts off the glass table, but I easily blocked her hand. You had me investigated. Nia screamed, her eyes wide with manic fury. You hired a private investigator to dig through my medical records. You are a sick, twisted stalker, Zora. You have no right to look into my personal life. I have every right to investigate the financial liabilities of the estate I am foreclosing on, I replied coldly. You are a liability, Nia. You are a parasite who has contributed absolutely nothing to this world except lies and manipulation. Your entire existence is a carefully curated fraud. You and Trey are the exact same person. You deserve each other. Vivian could no longer contain herself. Seeing her golden child, her perfect reflection, completely exposed and humiliated was too much for her fragile ego to process. She stepped forcefully between me and Nia, throwing her arms wide to shield her precious daughter. Leave her alone! Vivian screamed, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. How dare you come into my home and attack my daughter? Nia is a good person. She made a mistake because she was under immense pressure. You are a monster, Zora. You are a cold, heartless monster trying to destroy your own blood. You are trying to tear this family apart because you are a bitter, lonely sociopath. I will not let you ruin my beautiful daughter. I stared at Vivian, watching the desperate panic in her eyes. She was still trying to maintain the illusion. She was still trying to protect the fake perfection of her high society image, even as her entire world burned to the ground around her. She called me a monster. She accused me of destroying blood. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my mother. The anger I had suppressed for 7 long years finally began to rise to the surface, hot and unyielding. You want to talk about destroying blood, Mother? I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. You want to talk about the sanctity of family and the importance of our legacy? Vivian glared at me, her chest heaving. Yes, she hissed. You are destroying everything we built. I held her gaze, refusing to look away. Fine, I said. Let us talk about destruction. Let us talk about the legacy you have built. Let us talk about the first Mount Zion Church. Let us talk about the HBCU Scholarship Fund. Desmond stared at the bright yellow foreclosure notice trembling in his hands. The aggressive black letters seemed to burn into his retinas. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound managed to escape his throat. The towering patriarch. The man who had spent his entire life demanding absolute submission from everyone around him was suddenly reduced to a speechless, hollow shell. He looked from the document to my face, and then back to the document, hoping it was some kind of elaborate hallucination. It was not. The reality of his complete financial ruin was staring him right in the face. This is impossible! Desmond finally gasped, his voice cracking under the immense weight of his own failure. I am a respected businessman. I have connections at the bank. They would never seize my primary residence without a formal sit-down meeting. You fabricated this document, Zora. You are trying to use scare tactics to push me out of my own house. I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space and forcing him to look me directly in the eyes. I did not fabricate anything, Dad. I replied, my voice sharp and unwavering. The bank stopped treating you like a respected businessman 5 years ago. Your credit score is a complete disaster. You have not closed a successful real estate deal since I was in high school. You survive purely on the fumes of Grandpa Jeremiah's legendary reputation. The only reason the bank even allowed you to take out that massive third mortgage in the first place was because you fraudulently forged Grandpa's signature on the authorization paperwork. You committed a severe federal crime to get your hands on that cash. Vivian, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, clutching her ruined church scholarship documents, suddenly snapped her head up, her tear-stained face contorted in deep confusion. Third mortgage. Vivian repeated, her voice thick with panic. Desmond, what is she talking about? You told me we owned this estate free and clear. You told me the business was just experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. Why did you take out a third mortgage behind my back? Where did all that money go? Desmond completely ignored his wife. He backed away from me, shaking his head frantically. It went to the business. Desmond lied, his eyes darting nervously around the grand living room. I reinvested it into the commercial properties. I was trying to save the family portfolio. You are such a pathetic liar, Dad, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. I pulled a sleek silver tablet from my briefcase and tapped the screen. I did not just buy your debt today. I bought the entire financial investigation file the bank compiled before they initiated the foreclosure. I know exactly where every single cent of that third mortgage went. And it certainly did not go into the family portfolio. I held the tablet up so both Desmond and Vivian could see the bright screen. It displayed a series of highly detailed real estate transactions and luxury car purchases, all registered in Houston, Texas. Let us talk about an upscale high-rise condominium in downtown Houston, I said, projecting my voice so it echoed off the crystal chandelier. Let us talk about the brand new Porsche completely paid off in cash and the monthly allowance of $10,000 you have been wiring to a private account for the last 4 years. Let us talk about a 26-year-old fitness instructor named Jasmine. Desmond dropped the foreclosure notice. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. Zora, shut your mouth, he commanded, his voice barely a terrified whisper. Do not say another word. Vivian slowly pushed herself up from the floor. Her designer dress was wrinkled, and her perfect hair was a mess. But the sheer fury radiating from her body was absolutely terrifying. She stared at the transaction records on the tablet. She read the name on the account. She saw the massive amounts of money being wired out of her household, while she was desperately embezzling charity funds just to maintain their fake wealthy lifestyle. A mistress, Vivian screamed, the sound tearing from her throat like a wild animal. You mortgaged my house to fund a mistress in Texas. I have been stealing from the church. I have been risking my entire freedom and my sacred reputation to keep this family afloat, and you have been funding a 26-year-old girl. Vivian lunged at her husband. She did not care about her social standing anymore. She did not care about the optics or the imaginary country club friends she was trying to impress. She flew at Desmond with her hands raised, her perfectly manicured nails aiming straight for his face. She slammed her fists into his chest, slapping and scratching him with a violent, hysterical energy. Desmond threw his arms up, trying to shield his face from her relentless assault. Get off me, Vivian, Desmond shouted, pushing her back hard enough that she stumbled against the velvet sofa. You drove me to this. You and your endless demand for luxury. You bled my accounts, dry buying designer bags and hosting ridiculous garden parties we could not afford. I needed an escape from your constant nagging and your fake high society obsession. You are a miserable woman to live with. Nia stood frozen in the corner, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her perfect parents physically and verbally tear each other to shreds. Trey was still pinned against the wall by my security guard, watching his wealthy meal ticket evaporate into thin air. The absolute pinnacle of black excellence they had projected to the world was now entirely obliterated. They were nothing but a group of desperate broke frauds, fighting over the ashes of an empire they had selfishly burned to the ground. While the chaotic scene unfolded in the center of the living room, I noticed a quiet movement near the coffee table. Mr. Bradley, the corrupt family lawyer, was frantically shoving his legal folders and his laptop back into his leather briefcase. He had seen enough. He knew the fraudulent waiver was ruined. He knew Desmond and Vivian were completely bankrupt and heading for prison. He was trying to slip out the front door before I turned my relentless attention toward him. Going somewhere, Mr. Bradley? I asked, my voice slicing through the sounds of my parents' screaming match. The lawyer froze. He adjusted his glasses nervously and gripped the handle of his briefcase. I am simply removing myself from a highly volatile domestic dispute, Zora, Mr. Bradley said, attempting to sound professional despite the obvious fear in his eyes. My services are clearly no longer required here. The waiver is ruined and the buyout is canceled. I will be taking the original estate documents back to my office for safekeeping. You are not taking anything out of this house, I replied calmly. I snapped my fingers. My second security guard, a towering man in a black suit, immediately stepped directly in front of the heavy double doors blocking Mr. Bradley's only exit. The guard crossed his massive arms and stared down at the trembling lawyer. You cannot hold me here against my will, Mr. Bradley stammered, taking a quick step backward. I am an officer of the court. You are legally required to let me leave. You are a conspirator to massive financial fraud, I corrected him, stepping closer. You helped Desmond forge my grandfather's signature on the third mortgage documents. You knowingly drafted a fake waiver to help Trey steal $20 million. You have been covering up my parents' embezzlement for years. You are not leaving this estate until the authorities arrive to take your statement. Mr. Bradley realized he was completely trapped. The polite professional mask melted away, revealing the cornered, desperate rat underneath. He clutched his briefcase tightly against his chest like a shield. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and arrogant defiance. You think you have won because you bought a few debts and foreclosed on a house? Mr. Bradley sneered, his voice dripping with sudden venom. You think your venture capital money makes you the undisputed queen of this family. You are deeply mistaken, Zora. You forgot one extremely critical detail in your grand revenge plan. He quickly unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder sealed with a heavy gold ribbon. He held it up like a weapon. This is Jeremiah's authentic legal will, Mr. Bradley declared loudly, demanding the attention of everyone in the room. Vivian and Desmond stopped fighting. Nia stopped crying. They all turned to stare at the golden ribbon. It does not matter if you own the physical house. Zora the lawyer continued, a wicked smile spreading across his face. It does not matter if you own Trey's debt. The vast majority of this family's generational wealth is locked inside the liquid asset trusts and the commercial holding companies. And according to this legally binding document, Desmond is named as the sole executor of the entire estate upon Jeremiah's passing. Desmond wiped a streak of blood from his scratched cheek and suddenly stood up taller. A fresh wave of arrogant hope washed over his face. He realized he still had one final card to play. That is right, Desmond shouted, pointing a finger at me. I am the executor. The second that death certificate is processed, I control the billions of dollars in the commercial trust. I will use that money to pay off the foreclosure. I will hire a team of elite lawyers to crush your venture capital firm. You cannot touch the core family wealth, Zora. Mr. Bradley nodded, holding the document higher. Your grandfather is dead, Zora. He passed away last night in the hospital. This document gives your father absolute patriarchal control over the family fortune. Your titanium black card means absolutely nothing against the legally binding wishes of a deceased man. You have no legal standing here. You are still just an outcast. I stared at the corrupt lawyer and my desperate father. I did not flinch. I did not panic. I simply stood there absorbing their final pathetic attempt to maintain control. They were clinging to a ghost, hoping a piece of paper would save them from the devastating reality I had just dropped on their heads. I tilted my head and let a slow, dark smile spread across my face. I looked directly at Mr. Bradley, and then shifted my gaze to Desmond. You are staking your entire future on the assumption that my grandfather is dead, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the sudden silence of the room. You are betting your freedom on a death certificate that has not even been printed yet. That is a very dangerous gamble, gentlemen. Desmond frowned, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? He demanded. The hospital called us. His heart stopped. He is gone. I did not answer him. Instead, I turned my body slightly toward the heavy oak double doors that led directly into my grandfather's grand private study. The entire room fell into a breathless, suffocating silence. Suddenly, the heavy brass door handles clicked loudly. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The tall wooden doors slowly swung open, revealing the dark interior of the study. A shadow moved in the doorway. The sharp, distinct sound of a gold-handled cane striking the hardwood floor cut through the quiet air. Step. Clack. Step. Clack. Every single person in the living room froze in absolute terror. They stared at the doorway as if a literal ghost was about to walk through it. A tall, imposing figure stepped out of the shadows and into the bright light of the grand living room. He wore a perfectly tailored three-piece suit. His posture was rigid and proud. His eyes burned with an intense, fiery rage that could melt solid steel. Grandpa Jeremiah stood there gripping his gold-handled cane, looking at the family that had just spent the last hour plotting to steal his legacy. I am not in the ground yet, Desmond Jeremiah said, his deep, resonant voice shaking the very foundation of the house. And you are not the executor of anything. Desmond stared at the bright yellow foreclosure notice trembling in his hands. The aggressive black letters seemed to burn into his retinas. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound managed to escape his throat. The towering patriarch, the man who had spent his entire life demanding absolute submission from everyone around him, was suddenly reduced to a speechless hollow shell. He looked from the document to my face, and then back to the document, hoping it was some kind of elaborate hallucination. It was not. The reality of his complete financial ruin was staring him right in the face. "This is impossible," Desmond finally gasped, his voice cracking under the immense weight of his own failure. "I am a respected businessman. I have connections at the bank. They would never seize my primary residence without a formal sit-down meeting. You fabricated this document, Zora. You are trying to use scare tactics to push me out of my own house." I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space and forcing him to look me directly in the eyes. "I did not fabricate anything, Dad," I replied, my voice sharp and unwavering. "The bank stopped treating you like a respected businessman 5 years ago. Your credit score is a complete disaster. You have not closed a successful real estate deal since I was in high school. You survive purely on the fumes of Grandpa Jeremiah's legendary reputation. The only reason the bank even allowed you to take out that massive third mortgage in the first place was because you fraudulently forged Grandpa's signature on the authorization paperwork. You committed a severe federal crime to get your hands on that cash." Vivian, who was still kneeling on the marble floor clutching her ruined church scholarship documents, suddenly snapped her head up, her tear-stained face contorted in deep confusion. "Third mortgage," Vivian repeated, her voice thick with panic. "Desmond, what is she talking about? You told me we owned this estate free and clear. You told me the business was just experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. Why did you take out a third mortgage behind my back? Where did all that money go?" Desmond completely ignored his wife. He backed away from me, shaking his head frantically. "It went to the business," Desmond lied, his eyes darting nervously around the grand living room. "I reinvested it into the commercial properties. I was trying to save the family portfolio." "You are such a pathetic liar, Dad," I said, crossing my arms over my chest. I pulled a sleek silver tablet from my briefcase and tapped the screen. "I did not just buy your debt today. I bought the entire financial investigation file the bank compiled before they initiated the foreclosure. I know exactly where every single cent of that third mortgage went. And it certainly did not go into the family portfolio." I held the tablet up so both Desmond and Vivian could see the bright screen. It displayed a series of highly detailed real estate transactions and luxury car purchases, all registered in Houston, Texas. "Let us talk about an upscale high-rise condominium in downtown Houston," I said, projecting my voice so it echoed off the crystal chandelier. "Let us talk about the brand new Porsche, completely paid off in cash, and the monthly allowance of $10,000 you have been wiring to a private account for the last 4 years. Let us talk about a 26-year-old fitness instructor named Jasmine." Desmond dropped the foreclosure notice. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. "Zora, shut your mouth," he commanded, his voice barely a terrified whisper. "Do not say another word." Vivian slowly pushed herself up from the floor. Her designer dress was wrinkled, and her perfect hair was a mess, but the sheer fury radiating from her body was absolutely terrifying. She stared at the transaction records on the tablet. She read the name on the account. She saw the massive amounts of money being wired out of her household while she was desperately embezzling charity funds just to maintain their fake wealthy lifestyle. "A mistress." Vivian screamed, the sound tearing from her throat like a wild animal. "You mortgaged my house to fund a mistress in Texas. I have been stealing from the church. I have been risking my entire freedom and my sacred reputation to keep this family afloat, and you have been funding a 26-year-old girl." Vivian lunged at her husband. She did not care about her social standing anymore. She did not care about the optics or the imaginary country club friends she was trying to impress. She flew at Desmond, with her hands raised, her perfectly manicured nails aiming straight for his face. She slammed her fist into his chest, slapping and scratching him with a violent, hysterical energy. Desmond threw his arms up, trying to shield his face from her relentless assault. "Get off me, Vivian," Desmond shouted, pushing her back hard enough that she stumbled against the velvet sofa. "You drove me to this. You and your endless demand for luxury. You bled my accounts dry buying designer bags and hosting ridiculous garden parties we could not afford. I needed an escape from your constant nagging and your fake high society obsession. You are a miserable woman to live with. Nia stood frozen in the corner, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her perfect parents physically and verbally tear each other to shreds. Trey was still pinned against the wall by my security guard, watching his wealthy meal ticket evaporate into thin air. The absolute pinnacle of black excellence they had projected to the world was now entirely obliterated. They were nothing but a group of desperate broke frauds, fighting over the ashes of an empire they had selfishly burned to the ground. While the chaotic scene unfolded in the center of the living room, I noticed a quiet movement near the coffee table. Mr. Bradley, the corrupt family lawyer, was frantically shoving his legal folders and his laptop back into his leather briefcase. He had seen enough. He knew the fraudulent waiver was ruined. He knew Desmond and Vivian were completely bankrupt and heading for prison. I was trying to slip out the front door before I turned my relentless attention toward him. "Going somewhere, Mr. Bradley?" I asked, my voice slicing through the sounds of my parents' screaming match. The lawyer froze. He adjusted his glasses nervously and gripped the handle of his briefcase. "I am simply removing myself from a highly volatile domestic dispute," Zora, Mr. Bradley said, attempting to sound professional, despite the obvious fear in his eyes. "My services are clearly no longer required here. The waiver is ruined and the buyout is cancelled. I will be taking the original estate documents back to my office for safekeeping." "You are not taking anything out of this house," I replied calmly. I snapped my fingers. My second security guard, a towering man in a black suit, immediately stepped directly in front of the heavy double doors blocking Mr. Bradley's only exit. The guard crossed his massive arms and stared down at the trembling lawyer. "You cannot hold me here against my will," Mr. Bradley stammered, taking a quick step backward. "I am an officer of the court. You are legally required to let me leave." "You are a conspirator to massive financial fraud," I corrected him, stepping closer. "You helped Desmond forge my grandfather's signature on the third mortgage documents. You knowingly drafted a fake waiver to help Trey steal $20 million. You have been covering up my parents' embezzlement for years. You are not leaving this estate until the authorities arrive to take your statement." Mr. Bradley realized he was completely trapped. The polite professional mask melted away, revealing the cornered, desperate rat underneath. He clutched his briefcase tightly against his chest like a shield. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and arrogant defiance. "You think you have won because you bought a few debts and foreclosed on a house?" Mr. Bradley sneered, his voice dripping with sudden venom. "You think your venture capital money makes you the undisputed queen of this family? You are deeply mistaken, Zora. You forgot one extremely critical detail in your grand revenge plan." He quickly unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder sealed with a heavy gold ribbon. He held it up like a weapon. "This is Jeremiah's authentic legal will," Mr. Bradley declared loudly, demanding the attention of everyone in the room. Vivian and Desmond stopped fighting. Nia stopped crying. They all turned to stare at the golden ribbon. "It does not matter if you own the physical house," Zora the lawyer continued, a wicked smile spreading across his face. "It does not matter if you own Trey's debt. The vast majority of this family's generational wealth is locked inside the liquid asset trusts and the commercial holding companies. And according to this legally binding document, Desmond is named as the sole executor of the entire estate upon Jeremiah's passing." Desmond wiped a streak of blood from his scratched cheek and suddenly stood up taller. A fresh wave of arrogant hope washed over his face. He realized he still had one final card to play. "That is right," Desmond shouted, pointing a finger at me. "I am the executor. The second that death certificate is processed, I control the billions of dollars in the commercial trust. I will use that money to pay off the foreclosure. I will hire a team of elite lawyers to crush your venture capital firm. You cannot touch the core family wealth, Zora." Mr. Bradley nodded, holding the document higher. "Your grandfather is dead, Zora. He passed away last night in the hospital. This document gives your father absolute patriarchal control over the family fortune. Your titanium black card means absolutely nothing against the legally binding wishes of a deceased man. You have no legal standing here. You are still just an outcast. I stared at the corrupt lawyer and my desperate father. I did not flinch. I did not panic. I simply stood there absorbing their final pathetic attempt to maintain control. They were clinging to a ghost, hoping a piece of paper would save them from the devastating reality I had just dropped on their heads. I tilted my head and let a slow, dark smile spread across my face. I looked directly at Mr. Bradley and then shifted my gaze to Desmond. You are staking your entire future on the assumption that my grandfather is dead, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the sudden silence of the room. You are betting your freedom on a death certificate that has not even been printed yet. That is a very dangerous gamble, gentlemen. Desmond frowned, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? He demanded. The hospital called us. His heart stopped. He is gone. I did not answer him. Instead, I turned my body slightly toward the heavy oak double doors that led directly into my grandfather's grand private study. The entire room fell into a breathless, suffocating silence. Suddenly, the heavy brass door handles clicked loudly. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Everyone jumped back. The tall wooden doors slowly swung open, revealing the dark interior of the study. The shadows seemed to stretch outwards into the bright living room. A shadow moved in the doorway. The sharp, distinct sound of a gold-handled cane striking the hardwood floor cut through the quiet air. Step, clack, step, clack. Every single person in the living room froze in absolute terror. They stared at the doorway as if a literal ghost was about to walk through it. A tall, imposing figure stepped out of the shadows and into the bright light of the grand living room. He wore a perfectly tailored three-piece suit. His posture was rigid and proud. He did not look like a man who had just died. His eyes burned with an intense fiery rage that could melt solid steel. I took another very slow, deliberate step forward into the room. Grandpa Jeremiah stood there, gripping his gold-handled cane, looking at the family that had just spent the last hour plotting to steal his legacy. I am not in the ground yet, Desmond Jeremiah said, his deep, resonant voice shaking the very foundation of the house, and you are not the executor of anything. The collective gasp that sucked the air out of the grand living room was a sound of pure primal terror. Desmond stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished marble floor. He collided heavily with the edge of the velvet sofa, unable to tear his eyes away from the towering figure standing in the doorway of the study. My father looked as though the floor had just opened up to swallow him whole. His hands shook violently as he reached out, grasping the empty air, as if trying to physically push away the horrifying reality standing right in front of him. Vivian let out a high-pitched, strangled noise that sounded exactly like a dying bird. She scrambled backward on her knees, her designer gown tangling around her legs, her eyes wide and unblinking. She pressed her back against the heavy base of the coffee table, trembling so uncontrollably that her pearl necklace rattled loudly against her collarbone. Nia stood completely frozen in the far corner, her mouth hanging open, her hands plastered to the sides of her face in a mask of absolute horror. Even Trey, who was still firmly pinned against the wall by my security guard, stopped struggling entirely. He stared at my grandfather, his chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. Behind Grandpa, Jeremiah, three sharply dressed men and two women stepped out from the dark shadows of the study. They were not just any regular lawyers. They were his personal, high-powered legal team, the most ruthless and expensive corporate attorneys in the entire state of Georgia. They fanned out behind him, forming an impenetrable wall of absolute legal authority. Their intimidating presence alone completely neutralized the pathetic, corrupt threat that Mr. Bradley had attempted to pose just moments ago. Mr. Bradley immediately dropped his briefcase. It hit the floor with a loud thud, spilling his fraudulent documents across the marble. He raised his hands in a gesture of immediate surrender, his face completely devoid of color. He knew his miserable career was officially over today. Jeremiah did not even look at the cowardly lawyer. His burning gaze was locked entirely on his son. He took another slow, deliberate step into the room, leaning heavily on his gold-handled cane. The sharp clack of the metal tip hitting the floor echoed like a judge's gavel delivering a final, devastating verdict. "You look like you have seen a ghost," Desmond Jeremiah said, his voice dripping with absolute pure disgust. Or perhaps you just look like a desperate man who realizes he has finally run out of lies to tell. Desmond swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. Dad, he whispered, his voice cracking. Dad, we thought you were gone. The hospital called us. They said your heart stopped. We were grieving. We were just trying to protect your legacy. We were trying to keep the family empire safe from greedy outsiders. Do not you dare speak to me about protecting my legacy! Jeremiah roared, his voice booming with a ferocious power that demanded absolute silence. You do not care about this family. You do not care about the massive empire I spent 50 years building from the ground up with my own two hands. You care about maintaining your fake social status at the country club. You care about funding your secret mistresses in Houston. You care about feeding your own bloated, fragile ego. I heard every single word you said today, Desmond. I heard absolutely everything. Desmond flinched as if he had been physically struck across the face. He looked from Jeremiah to me and then back to his angry father, his eyes filled with profound confusion. How Desmond stammered, his hands trembling wildly. How could you hear us? Zora called me this morning, Jeremiah explained, stepping closer to the center of the living room. She put her phone on speaker. I listened as you and Vivian gleefully celebrated my supposed death. I listened as you viciously mocked the only daughter who actually inherited my business acumen and my work ethic. And then I kept the open line connected. Zora's phone has been broadcasting this entire humiliating spectacle directly into the study. I sat in there with my legal team and listened to you completely dismantle yourselves. I heard you try to force Zora to sign away her rights. I heard Trey confess to owing violent loan sharks. I heard you discover your wife's disgusting embezzlement from the church. I heard you admit to forging my signature on a massive third mortgage to fund your pathetic secret life. You are a complete disgrace to my name, Desmond. Desmond dropped to his knees right next to the sofa, completely broken. He buried his face in his hands, sobbing loudly. Dad, please, he wept. I made mistakes. I made terrible, desperate mistakes. But I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. You cannot just throw me away. I can change. I can fix this terrible mess. You are not my son, Jeremiah stated coldly, his voice devoid of any parental warmth. A true son would have protected the family assets instead of using them as a personal piggy bank. A true father would have protected his daughters instead of throwing one out into the freezing rain and turning the other into a spoiled, manipulative parasite. You are stripped of the family name Desmond. You will not receive a single cent from my bank accounts. You are entirely cut off from the generational wealth you tried so desperately to steal. Jeremiah slowly turned his piercing gaze toward Vivian. She was still cowering on the floor, clutching the sharp edge of the coffee table. Her expensive makeup was completely ruined, running down her face in dark, messy streaks. She looked up at my grandfather with terrified, pleading eyes. Jeremiah, please, Vivian begged, her voice shaking hysterically. Please forgive us. We lost our way. The pressure to maintain our prominent position in the Black elite community was simply too much to bear. We made horrible choices, but we did it to keep the family image perfectly intact. Please do not destroy us. You destroyed yourselves, Vivian, Jeremiah replied, stepping toward her. You stole from the sacred scholarship fund of our church. You stole money meant to educate brilliant young Black minds, just to buy designer bags for a daughter who fakes pregnancies to extort cash. You are a vile, selfish woman. But your financial crimes are not even the darkest part of your soul, Vivian. Embezzlement is just the surface of your absolute profound rottenness. Vivian froze. Her crying stopped abruptly. She stared at Jeremiah, a new kind of sheer terror creeping into her wide eyes. What do you mean? Vivian whispered, her voice barely audible. Jeremiah leaned heavily on his gold-handled cane, looking down at her with a chilling, unforgiving expression. I am talking about the night I was hospitalized, Vivian. I am talking about the night I suffered my massive heart attack in the upstairs hallway of this very estate. The entire room went completely still. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I watched the woman who had birthed me attempt to process the intense danger she was currently in. I knew my parents were greedy and manipulative, but the dark, intense tone in my grandfather's voice suggested something far more sinister than financial fraud. I remember that night very clearly. Jeremiah continued, his voice echoing in the silent room. I remember the crushing pain in my chest. I remember collapsing on the floor, grasping for breath. And I remember you, Vivian, standing right over me. I remember Trey standing right beside you. Nia gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. She looked at her mother in pure shock. Trey suddenly began struggling violently against the security guard, trying desperately to break free, but the guard slammed him back against the wall, securing him even tighter. You saw me fall, Jeremiah said, his voice rising with intense righteous fury. You saw me clutching my chest, begging for help. But you did not immediately call the ambulance, did you, Vivian? You and Trey stood there watching me struggle to breathe. You deliberately delayed calling emergency services to ensure I would pass away. You wanted me dead so you could finally take absolute control, the chance to finalize my new will. You tried to murder me by intentional neglect. The accusation hit the room like a massive explosive detonation. Desmond stopped sobbing and stared at his wife in sheer horrific disbelief. Even for a man who had secretly mortgaged his family home to fund a mistress, the idea of attempted murder was completely unfathomable. That is a lie! Vivian screamed, scrambling backward on the floor, her voice cracking with pure hysterical desperation. She pointed a shaking finger at my grandfather. You are a liar. You were hallucinating from the intense pain. You did not know what was happening. Trey and I called the paramedics the exact second we found you. We tried to save you. We panicked because it was an emergency, but we called them. You are making this up to ruin me. You are trying to destroy my life because you have always hated me. She looked wildly around the room, trying to find anyone who would believe her frantic, desperate lies. She looked at Desmond, but he shrank away from her in disgust. She looked at Nia, but Nia was backing away, shaking her head in total horror. Vivian was completely cornered, trapped in the terrifying reality of her own monstrous actions. I am not a liar, Vivian, Jeremiah stated, his voice ringing with absolute terrifying authority. And I do not make accusations without undeniable, irrefutable proof. I knew exactly who you were. I knew exactly what you were capable of doing for money. That is why I had private security cameras installed in the main hallways of this estate 6 months ago. The cameras have hidden microphones, Vivian. Vivian stopped breathing. Her eyes widened so far they looked like they might pop out of her skull. She shook her head frantically, muttering under her breath. No, no, that is impossible. You are bluffing. You are completely bluffing. Jeremiah did not even blink. He slowly turned his head to look at the tall, sharp-suited lead attorney standing directly behind his right shoulder. The attorney stepped forward, his expression completely blank and professional. Execute Directive 4, Jeremiah commanded. The lead attorney nodded sharply. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek digital audio recorder. He held it up high, right in the center of the completely silent room, ensuring every single person present could clearly see it shining brightly. He pressed his thumb firmly against the play button. The tiny speaker on the digital device crackled to life, filling the dead silence of the living room with the unmistakable ambient sounds of a hospital ward. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor echoed first, followed by the harsh, ragged gasps of a man struggling for his life. It was Grandpa Jeremiah fighting for oxygen. Then came the whispers. They were hushed and frantic, but undeniably clear. We need to call a nurse, Trey whispered, his voice trembling with panicked urgency on the recording. He is having a massive heart attack, Vivian. He is going to die right here. Do not you dare touch that call button, Vivian hissed back. Her recorded voice was completely devoid of any panic or empathy. It was chillingly calculated. If the medical staff rushes in here right now, they might actually manage to stabilize him. If he survives this, he is going to finalize the new estate documents tomorrow morning, and we lose everything. We lose the house, the trust funds, and the commercial properties. Step away from the bed right now, Trey. We are going to wait exactly 15 minutes. 15 minutes is all it will take to secure our entire future permanently. The recording captured the agonizing sounds of my grandfather choking on his own failing breath. It captured the horrifying reality of a daughter standing over her dying father, watching the seconds tick by, waiting for his heart to completely stop. The lead attorney pressed a button, and the horrific audio abruptly ended. The silence that slammed back into the grand living room was absolute and suffocating. The air suddenly felt incredibly heavy and painfully cold. Desmond backed away from his wife as if she had suddenly transformed into a venomous snake. His face was entirely drained of color. "You tried to murder my father," Desmond whispered, his voice cracking under the devastating weight of the revelation. "You stood there and watched him die for a house." Vivian could not speak. Her jaw opened and closed, but no sound escaped her throat. She had been stripped of every defense, every lie, and every manipulation she had ever used. The undeniable truth of her absolute evil was now exposed for everyone to see. Trey realized his fate before anyone else could fully process the magnitude of the audio recording. He was no longer just a desperate failed businessman drowning in massive debt to violent loan sharks. He was now a documented accomplice to attempted murder. He was facing decades in a federal prison. Pure animalistic panic completely hijacked his nervous system. "I am not going to jail!" Trey screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. He violently shoved Nia away from him, sending her stumbling backward into the velvet sofa. He wildly lunged away from the wall, desperately tearing himself out of the security guard's grip. His tailored suit jacket ripped loudly down the center seam as he broke free. Trey scrambled across the imported Persian rug, sprinting frantically toward the massive glass patio doors that led out to the back gardens. It was his only possible exit. "Stop him!" Jeremiah commanded, his voice echoing like thunder across the room. Trey reached the heavy wooden console table near the patio doors. Knowing the security team was right behind him, he blindly grabbed a massive antique crystal vase from the tabletop. He smashed it violently against the edge of the heavy table. The thick crystal shattered instantly, sending sharp, glittering shards raining down across the hardwood floor. Trey spun around wildly, wielding the jagged, broken base of the crystal vase like a desperate weapon. "Stay away from me!" he yelled wildly, swinging the jagged glass through the air. "I will cut anyone who touches me. I am leaving this house right now." My private security guards did not even flinch. The lead guard lunged forward with terrifying speed and absolute precision. He easily ducked under Trey's frantic swinging arm, grabbed his wrist, and violently twisted it backward. Trey let out a sharp scream of sudden agony as the broken crystal dropped from his grasp and shattered into dust on the floor. The second guard immediately stepped in, kicking Trey's legs out from under him. Trey crashed hard onto the polished hardwood floor, his breath leaving his lungs in a loud rush. Before he could even attempt to struggle, the guards forcefully flipped him onto his stomach and pinned his arms painfully behind his back. The heavy knee of the lead guard pressed firmly between Trey's shoulder blades, completely immobilizing him against the hard floor. Trey's cheek was pressed flat against the wood, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. He began to sob uncontrollably, whining and begging for mercy like a pathetic child. His grand illusion of superiority was permanently destroyed. He was nothing but a broken criminal pinned to the ground, waiting for his inevitable punishment. Nia watched her husband sobbing pathetically on the floor and realized her entire world had just evaporated. The wealth she had always felt entitled to was gone. The perfect high society marriage she had paraded around Atlanta was exposed as a complete sham. Her mother was a criminal, and her father was a bankrupt fraud. Her luxurious safety net had been completely shredded. Nia possessed the exact same survival instincts as our mother. She knew how to adapt, how to manipulate, and how to latch on to whoever held the most power in the room. Right now, the ultimate power belonged entirely to Grandpa Jeremiah. Nia threw herself off the velvet sofa and scrambled across the floor on her hands and knees. She ignored the broken glass and the spilled ink, crawling desperately toward where my grandfather stood. She collapsed completely at his feet, burying her face against his expensive leather shoes. She wrapped her arms tightly around his legs, sobbing with loud theatrical wails that echoed painfully through the grand room. "Grandpa, please," Nia cried, looking up at him with mascara running down her tear-stained cheeks in dark rivers. "You have to believe me. I had absolutely no idea what they were doing. I swear to you I knew nothing about the hospital room. Trey manipulated me from the very beginning. He lied to me about his business, about his massive debts, about everything. He used me to get to your money, and Mom forced me to go along with her plans. They controlled me, Grandpa. They made me treat Zora terribly. I was just a victim of their toxic manipulation. Please do not punish me for their horrible crimes." Please do not cut me out of the family. I love you so much. I will do whatever you want. Just give me another chance. I watched my sister debase herself, completely disgusted by her absolute lack of loyalty or genuine remorse. She was willing to throw her own mother and her husband into a fire if it meant saving her own luxurious lifestyle. She truly believed her fake tears and her lifelong status as the golden child would miraculously save her from the consequences of her own terrible actions. Jeremiah looked down at the sobbing woman clutching his legs. His expression was entirely devoid of sympathy. His eyes were cold, hard, and unyielding. He slowly reached down and firmly grasped her wrists, prying her desperate hands off his legs. He did not help her up. Instead, he placed the heavy rubber tip of his gold-handled cane directly against her shoulder. With a single cold, deliberate movement, he physically nudged her away from him, forcing her to stumble backward onto the rug. "Do not dare play the victim with me," Nia Jeremiah stated, his deep voice ringing with absolute finality. "I have watched you for years. I have watched you steal from your sister, mock her achievements, and gladly spend money that never belonged to you. You knew exactly who Trey was when you married him. You knew exactly how wicked your mother was, and you celebrated it because she always favored you. You are a grown woman completely responsible for your own wicked choices. You share the exact same dark soul as the woman who raised you." Jeremiah continued, pointing his cane directly at her. "You are just as rotten as your mother. You bring absolutely no value to the family name, and I will not allow you to poison my legacy any longer. You are stripped of your inheritance, you are stripped of your trust funds, and you are stripped of my protection. You will leave this estate today with absolutely nothing but the clothes currently on your back." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the grand living room, broken only by the pathetic sounds of Nia's weeping. Suddenly, a faint noise cut clearly through the tension. It was high-pitched and urgent, rapidly growing louder. The relentless wailing of approaching police sirens echoed loudly outside. Red and blue emergency lights flashed brightly through the tall windows. "The authorities have finally arrived." The wailing of police sirens grew deafening outside the grand estate. Red and blue emergency lights pierced through the tall living room windows, casting frantic strobe effects across the imported marble floors. The heavy oak front doors did not just open, they were forcefully breached. A massive swarm of uniformed officers from the Atlanta Police Department poured into the grand foyer, immediately followed by men and women wearing crisp windbreakers, emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The sheer number of law enforcement personnel overwhelmed the sprawling space, instantly seizing absolute control of the environment. My private security team calmly stepped back, allowing the highly trained federal agents to secure the immediate perimeter. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing woman with a deeply serious demeanor, strode directly into the center of the living room. She held a thick stack of manila folders securely in her left hand. "Nobody move," she commanded, her voice slicing through the chaotic air with absolute lethal authority. "We have multiple federal and state warrants for the arrest of several individuals currently standing in this room." Trey, who was still pinned firmly against the hardwood floor by my security guard, let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. Two uniformed officers stepped forward, grabbing him by the arms and hauling him roughly to his feet. "Trey Marcus, you are officially under arrest," the lead federal agent stated, reading clearly from the top document in her heavy file. "You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, massive corporate espionage, and attempted extortion. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Trey began sobbing hysterically as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. He looked absolutely pathetic, his torn custom designer suit hanging loosely off his trembling frame. He begged the arresting officers to loosen the tight metal cuffs, whining that he was a highly respected tech entrepreneur and that this entire situation was a massive, unfortunate misunderstanding. The officers ignored his desperate, pathetic pleas completely. Nia backed slowly away from her husband, pressing her body tightly against the velvet sofa. She did not shed a single genuine tear for him. She was entirely focused on preserving her own skin, watching the wealthy man she married get dragged toward the doorway like a common street criminal without uttering a single word of defense. The lead agent then turned her sharp, calculating gaze toward my mother. Vivian was still crouched awkwardly on the cold marble floor, surrounded by her ruined church scholarship documents and the digital audio recorder that had just broadcasted her chilling confession to the entire room. She looked up at the federal agent, her eyes wide with a strange mixture of absolute terror and deeply ingrained aristocratic indignation. Vivian Adams, the agent announced, stepping forward with a second set of heavy metal handcuffs. You are under arrest for severe financial crimes, including the grand embezzlement of protected charity funds. Furthermore, based on new audio evidence officially provided to our office this morning, you are also being charged with reckless endangerment and the attempted manslaughter of Jeremiah Adams. Vivian let out a piercing, dramatic shriek that rattled the expensive crystal chandelier hanging directly above us. No, she screamed, thrashing wildly as two female officers grabbed her arms and hauled her up from the floor. You absolutely cannot do this to me. I am a central pillar of the Atlanta Black elite. I am the esteemed chairwoman of the First Mount Zion Church Scholarship Committee. I host the prestigious annual Country Club Gala. You have absolutely no legal right to touch my body. The heavy metal handcuffs snapped securely around her delicate wrists, trapping her arms painfully behind her back. Vivian fought vigorously against the firm restraints, kicking her expensive designer heels against the polished marble floor. Be careful with me, she wailed, her voice cracking with pure hysterical panic. You are completely ruining my custom designer dress. This exclusive silk gown costs significantly more than your entire annual salary. Do you have any idea exactly who I am in this influential city? If my wealthy sorority sisters see me being dragged out of my own home in police handcuffs, I will be socially ruined forever. She was currently facing decades in a harsh federal penitentiary for actively attempting to murder her own elderly father and maliciously stealing from underprivileged college students. Yet her primary concern remained the wrinkles in her expensive dress and the fragile opinions of her superficial country club friends. It was a staggering display of ultimate narcissistic delusion that proved she possessed absolutely zero genuine remorse for her incredibly monstrous actions. Her entire identity was built on an illusion of perfection that was now shattering. While Vivian continued to scream and thrash violently against the unyielding arresting officers, Desmond finally made his move. The great proud patriarch who had spent his entire adult life aggressively demanding absolute submission from his family completely crumbled in the face of severe federal prison time. He scrambled frantically away from his hysterical, struggling wife and threw his body directly at the feet of the lead federal agent. He raised his shaking hands in a pathetic, cowardly gesture of complete surrender. Listen to me, Desmond begged, his voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated terror. I had absolutely nothing to do with the attempted murder plot. I was not even present in the house when Jeremiah had his massive heart attack. Vivian and Trey planned that sinister action entirely on their own, without my knowledge. They are the true criminals here today. The federal agent looked down at my father with an expression of profound, visible disgust. Desmond Adams, she said, pulling out the final arrest warrant from her folder. You are under arrest for massive bank fraud, deliberate forgery, and extensive tax evasion. You illegally mortgaged this family estate using forged signatures, and you have been deliberately hiding substantial assets in secret offshore accounts for over a decade. Desmond shook his head frantically, thick tears streaming rapidly down his flushed face. I will cooperate fully with your investigation, he pleaded, grabbing desperately at the bottom edge of the agent's dark jacket. I will tell you absolutely everything you need to know about Vivian's elaborate embezzlement schemes. I will gladly testify against my own son-in-law in federal court to ensure his conviction. I will give you every single password to their hidden offshore accounts right now. Just please grant me full legal immunity. You simply cannot send a prominent man of my high social standing to a brutal federal prison facility. I will not survive in that environment. I will serve you, my wife, and my son-in-law on a silver platter. Just let me walk away free. I stood completely silently beside Grandpa Jeremiah, watching my father's pathetic display of ultimate cowardice with icy detached observation. Desmond was eagerly willing to throw his wife of 30 long years and his prized golden son-in-law directly to the wolves if it meant saving his own miserable skin. He had absolutely no loyalty to anyone but his own survival. How as a hollow, cowardly man who had hidden behind a false facade of strong patriarchal authority for decades, and now that fragile facade was completely, utterly obliterated forever. The strong officers hauled Desmond forcefully to his feet, slapping the cold cuffs onto his wrists, while loudly reading him his Miranda rights. He hung his head, sobbing loudly, as the dark reality of his total financial and social destruction finally settled over him. The armed police officers began marching the three broken prisoners toward the grand double doors of the sprawling estate. Trey wept loudly, his head bowed in absolute public shame. Desmond stumbled forward, his weak legs barely supporting his heavy weight. But Vivian stubbornly refused to go quietly into the flashing lights. As the officers dragged her directly past the spot where I proudly stood, she suddenly dug her expensive heels into the floor and violently twisted her body to face me. Her eyes burned with a manic, venomous, intense hatred. She looked exactly like a cornered wild animal, entirely stripped of her fake high society elegance. "This is all your terrible fault!" Zora Vivian screamed, spitting the harsh words at me with lethal, desperate force. "You planned this entire cruel ambush just to destroy us today. You are a cold, heartless monster. You might have billions of dollars in your massive bank account right now, but you will die completely alone. Your money will never keep you warm at night. Your wealth will not buy you a real family. You will rot in your lonely penthouse because nobody will ever truly love you." I did not flinch even a single time. I slowly closed the physical distance between us, stepping right into my mother's furious face to deliver my final verbal blow. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, watching the manicured facade completely melt away into the raw terror of a cornered animal. She thrashed against the strong grip of the two female federal agents, but they held her firmly in place. Her breathing was ragged and her chest heaved as she glared at me with absolute venom. She truly believed her own twisted narrative. She genuinely thought I was the villain for refusing to be a silent victim in her elaborate financial crimes. "You think your wealth makes you untouchable, Zora." Vivian sneered, her voice cracking under the intense strain. "You think buying out debts and foreclosing on estates makes you a queen. You are nothing but an ungrateful child who forgot where she came from. You will spend the rest of your miserable life sitting in that expensive penthouse entirely alone." I let a slow and perfectly calm smile touch my lips. The chaotic flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers outside illuminated the dark marble foyer, casting long, dramatic shadows across my mother's ruined designer gown. I did not raise my voice or show even a fraction of the anger I had carried for 7 years. I simply leaned in closer, ensuring my words would burn themselves permanently into her memory. "I would rather be entirely alone, sitting on a solitary throne, than surrounded by a pit of venomous snakes." "Mother," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You traded your integrity for a country club membership, and you sacrificed your own blood to maintain a fake high society illusion. You stole from the church, and you watched your own father gasp for breath on the floor. You built your entire life on a foundation of desperate lies, and now you get to watch it all burn to ashes." I took a deliberate step backward, signaling to the federal agents that I was completely finished with her. I crossed my arms over my chest and held my head high. "Have a wonderful time explaining your refined grace and elegant manners to the federal judge, Mother," I said, dismissing her completely. The federal agents forcefully turned Vivian around and marched her out through the grand double doors. Her hysterical screams echoed across the manicured lawn until the heavy doors of the police cruiser finally slammed shut, cutting off the noise completely. Desmond followed closely behind her, his head bowed in absolute defeat, his shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of his monumental failure. Trey was dragged out last, whining and begging the officers to loosen his handcuffs, while Nia watched from the corner of the velvet sofa, entirely paralyzed by shock. The heavy front doors of the estate swung shut with a loud, definitive thud. The sudden silence that fell over the sprawling living room was profound and absolute. It was the heavy quiet of a massive storm finally passing, leaving only the transformed landscape behind. I turned away from the foyer and looked toward the center of the room. Grandpa Jeremiah was already moving slowly toward the grand mahogany desk situated in the corner of his private study. He gestured for me to follow him, using his gold-handled cane to steady his steps. The high-powered legal team filed into the room behind us, arranging themselves professionally around the perimeter of the classic space. Jeremiah sat down heavily in his high-backed leather chair, letting out a long, weary sigh. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, crisp document sealed in a heavy blue folder. He placed it carefully on the pristine surface of the desk, right next to his vintage brass lamp. "This is my true, authentic legal will," Jeremiah stated, his deep voice resonating with absolute clarity and unwavering purpose. The document that corrupt fool Mr. Bradley was waving around earlier was a carefully constructed forgery they forced upon me months ago. I knew exactly what they were planning, so I had my trusted attorneys draft this ironclad version in complete secrecy. He unfastened the thick blue folder and spread the heavy pages out across the mahogany wood. I stepped closer, looking down at the complex legal jargon detailing the massive expanse of the Addams family empire. Jeremiah picked up a heavy gold fountain pen from his desk set. He looked at the document and then looked up directly at me. His eyes were no longer filled with the fierce, righteous anger he had directed at Desmond and Vivian. Instead, they held a deep, profound sense of pride and quiet relief. "For decades, I built this real estate empire hoping I could pass it down to a son who understood the value of hard work," Jeremiah said softly. "But Desmond only understood the value of spending. He was weak, and he married a woman whose greed was absolutely insatiable. They infected this entire family with their toxic superficiality. They raised Nia to be a mirror image of their own worst traits. But you, Zora," he paused, his voice thick with genuine emotion, "you are entirely different. You are the only person in this entire lineage who actually inherited my true spirit." He uncapped the gold pen with a smooth, precise motion. "I watched you walk out of this house 7 years ago with absolutely nothing but a suitcase and your unyielding pride," Jeremiah continued. "They threw you out to the wolves expecting the world to completely crush you. They wanted you to fail because your independence threatened their carefully controlled narrative. But you did not fail, Zora. You took the scraps they left you, and you built a massive financial fortress. You returned here today, not as a victim begging for scraps, but as an absolute conqueror. You demonstrated the exact resilience and grit that our ancestors relied upon to survive." He leaned forward and pressed the gold pen to the signature line on the final page of the thick legal document. With strong, deliberate strokes, he signed his name, finalizing the massive transfer of wealth. "As of this exact moment, I am officially stepping down as the head of the Addams family empire," Jeremiah declared, sliding the documents across the mahogany desk toward me. "I am legally transferring 100% of my commercial real estate empire, my liquid assets, and my global holdings directly to your venture capital firm. Apex Holdings now owns everything. You earned this, Zora. I am incredibly proud of the brilliant, powerful woman you became after surviving their cruelty." I carefully picked up the thick stack of freshly signed legal documents from the mahogany desk, feeling the absolute monumental weight of my newly acquired generational empire. The power dynamics had permanently shifted. I was now the undisputed matriarch. As I secured the papers inside my structured leather briefcase, a pathetic whimpering sound echoed from the dark far corner of the study. I turned slowly to see Mr. Bradley, the deeply corrupt family lawyer, desperately trying to blend into the expensive silk wallpaper. I was trembling so violently that his leather portfolio shook audibly against his chest. Sweat dripped profusely down his pale forehead, completely ruining his polished professional demeanor. "What about me, Zora?" Mr. Bradley asked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "I was just following strict orders from your parents. I am a highly respected officer of the court. What exactly is going to happen to me now that you own everything?" I took 3 slow, measured steps toward him. I let a terrifying predatory smile spread completely across my face. I am going to systematically dismantle your entire existence, Mr. Bradley, I whispered softly. Tomorrow morning, my legal team will formally submit your fraudulent documents directly to the State Bar Association. You will be swiftly disbarred, publicly disgraced, and absolutely ruined. But I will not stop there. I will personally buy the commercial building that houses your prestigious downtown law firm. I will abruptly cancel your lease and physically evict your entire practice into the street. I will ensure that every single wealthy client you have drops your services by noon. You helped them steal my legacy, and now I am going to erase yours. His knees buckled and he slid down the silk wallpaper, landing in a pathetic heap on the imported rug. He clutched his head, sobbing uncontrollably, as he fully realized the inescapable reality of his impending doom. I turned my back on him entirely, feeling completely indifferent to his desperate weeping. I walked back to my grandfather, who was watching me with profound admiration shining brightly in his tired eyes. We stood together in the quiet study, surrounded by the undeniable magnitude of absolute victory. The dark storm had finally passed, completely clearing the path for a brilliant new era. I looked down at the golden pen resting on the heavy mahogany desk, knowing deeply that this glorious empire was truly mine. The future belonged to me. The future belonged to me. I turned my attention back to Mr. Bradley, who was still huddled pathetically against the imported silk wallpaper of the grand study. I did not just make empty verbal threats to intimidate him. I operated with lethal, absolute certainty. I pulled my sleek smartphone from my blazer pocket and tapped a single button. My lead corporate counsel answered on the very first ring. I kept my eyes locked directly on the trembling, corrupt lawyer. File the formal grievance with the State Bar Association immediately. I instructed my counsel, my voice carrying a cold, clinical precision. Attach the forged waiver, the fraudulent third mortgage authorization, and the digital audio recording of the attempted murder conspiracy to the official complaint. Send copies directly to the district attorney and the federal investigators. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Mr. Bradley let out a strangled, pathetic sob, realizing his entire professional career, his pristine reputation, and his freedom were officially over. My private security detail stepped forward, without needing a verbal command from me. They grabbed the disgraced, sweating lawyer by the arms and hauled him roughly to his feet. He did not even attempt to fight back. He simply let his ruined leather briefcase fall to the floor, spilling his useless legal pads across the rug as they dragged him out of the grand study. They marched him down the long hallway and physically threw him off my property. The heavy front doors slammed shut, echoing with a deeply satisfying finality. With the corrupt legal enabler permanently removed, I had to rapidly deal with the remaining financial parasites who had bled this family dry. I walked over to the grand mahogany desk and picked up the heavy receiver of the antique landline. I dialed the direct emergency line to my executive financial team at Apex Holdings. It was finally time to completely sever the toxic financial bloodline that had fed their disgusting arrogance for decades. Liquidate the entire fleet of luxury vehicles registered under Desmond's name. I commanded the moment my chief financial officer answered the line. Sell the custom Porsche, the vintage Mercedes, and the 2 brand-new Range Rovers immediately. Apply all the proceeds directly against the outstanding massive balance of his defaulted loans. Next, I want an immediate hard freeze and permanent cancellation on every single corporate credit card associated with this estate and the family name. That includes the platinum travel accounts, the high-limit black cards, and the emergency liquid reserve funds. Terminate every single one of them effective immediately. I want their financial access completely shut off before the police cruisers even reach the federal holding facility downtown. I hung up the phone, feeling a profound, resounding sense of closure wash over me. The endless rushing stream of stolen generational wealth that had successfully funded their exclusive country club memberships, their ridiculous designer wardrobes, and their fake high society lives was finally bone dry. They were completely, utterly broke. I walked out of the grand study and stepped back into the sprawling marble foyer. The chaotic flashing red and blue emergency lights were entirely gone, replaced by the steady gloomy gray light of a sudden severe afternoon thunderstorm. Heavy rain lashed violently against the tall custom windows, beating a relentless rhythm against the glass panes. I truly thought the massive house was entirely empty, but a slight nervous movement near the base of the grand sweeping staircase caught my eye. It was Nia. She had somehow managed to avoid being handcuffed and dragged out with our criminal parents and her fraudulent, desperate husband. She stood trembling in the deep shadows, wearing a ruined, wrinkled silk dress and clutching a single limited edition designer handbag tightly against her chest like a protective shield. Her perfect salon blowout was a messy, chaotic tangle, and her expensive contour makeup was streaked with desperate, terrified tears. She looked exactly like the frightened, helpless child she had always successfully pretended to be to manipulate our parents. But this time, the fear radiating from her body was absolutely genuine and real. "Zora," she whispered, her voice cracking pathetically, as she stepped slowly into the bright light of the crystal chandelier hanging above us. The police took Trey away in handcuffs. They took Mom and Dad. They took absolutely everyone from me. I have nothing left in the entire world. The bank accounts are all completely frozen. My platinum credit cards are declining everywhere. I tried to call a private luxury car service to take me to a downtown hotel, but the financial transaction failed instantly. Nia took another hesitant, shaky step toward me, her eyes wide and pleading. "I do not have a single dollar to my name." "Zora." She sobbed, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes and cutting clean tracks through her ruined foundation. "I do not have a car. I do not have a place to sleep tonight. The police told me I have to vacate the premises immediately because the property legally belongs to Apex Holdings now. Please, Zora, you have to help me. You are my older sister. You cannot just throw me out onto the street in the middle of a massive thunderstorm." "I will do whatever you want me to do. I will clean the massive house. I will work for you. Just please let me stay in my old bedroom for a few days until I can figure out a plan. I beg you." I stared at the golden child, the woman who had spent her entire existence ensuring I felt ugly, unwanted, and completely inferior. I remembered the countless times she had smirked at my pain. I remembered her standing by silently watching Vivian pack my meager belongings into cheap black garbage bags 7 years ago. I remembered how Nia had laughed with her wealthy friends when I was forced out into a freezing rainstorm with absolutely nowhere to go. I looked at the single designer handbag she was clutching so desperately. It was a bag purchased with stolen charity funds meant to educate underprivileged youth. She was clutching a literal symbol of her own profound moral bankruptcy. I slowly reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I did not pull out my exclusive titanium black card or my heavy checkbook. I pulled out a simple basic leather wallet. I opened it and extracted a single crisp paper bill. I took 2 deliberate steps forward, closing the physical distance between us. I held the money out toward her. Nia looked down at my outstretched hand. Her tear-filled eyes widened in pure absolute disbelief as she recognized the denomination. It was exactly $50. She looked up at my face, her expression twisting into a mixture of deep confusion and sudden rising indignation. "What is this?" Nia asked, her voice dropping its pleading tone and taking on a sharp, familiar edge of entitlement. "You are a literal billionaire, Zora. You just acquired a $70 million real estate empire and a massive venture capital firm. You own the banks. You own this entire estate, and you are offering me a single $50 bill. What am I supposed to do with $50? I kept my hand perfectly steady, holding the money out to her. "It is for a bus ticket, Nia," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any anger or sympathy. "It is the exact same amount of money Vivian shoved into my hand 7 years ago when she kicked me out of this house and threw my garbage bags onto the wet driveway. She told me to take the city bus and figure out my own miserable life. I took that $50 and I built an impenetrable global empire. I built a fortune because I actually knew the value of hard work and relentless resilience. You have spent your entire life feeding off the hard work of others like a greedy parasite. You manipulated, you lied, and you took everything that was handed to you without a single ounce of gratitude. Now it is your turn to figure out reality. You cannot do this to me! Nia shrieked, her voice echoing sharply in the large empty foyer. She refused to take the money, stepping back and shaking her head violently. I am not like you, Zora. I do not know how to ride a public bus. I have never worked a real job. I will literally die out there. I let the $50 bill flutter from my fingers. It drifted slowly through the cold air and landed silently on the polished marble floor. You can take it or leave it, I stated. But you are leaving my property right now. Nia realized the game was permanently over. She bent down, picked up the bill, and walked out into the freezing torrential rain. I turned around and walked back toward the private study. The storm had finally passed. Several months had passed since that stormy afternoon at the Grand Estate. The torrential rain that washed away the last remnants of my toxic family was now nothing more than a distant memory. I sat behind the massive curved mahogany desk in my sleek, high-rise corner office, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The morning sun bathed the city in a warm golden light, reflecting off the glass facades of the skyscrapers that I now owned or managed entirely. The muted ambient hum of a morning news broadcast played softly from the flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. I did not usually watch local news, but today featured a specific segment that brought a deep, resounding sense of absolute closure to my long journey. The polished news anchor looked directly into the camera, delivering the morning headlines. Former prominent Atlanta socialite Vivian was officially sentenced yesterday to 15 years in federal prison for the massive embezzlement of church charity funds and reckless endangerment, the anchor announced in a crisp tone. Her son-in-law, Trey Marcus, received a 20-year sentence without the possibility of early parole for extensive wire fraud and attempted extortion. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter, rich taste ground me in the present moment. The broadcast flashed a brief courtroom sketch of my mother. She looked completely unrecognizable. The expensive designer gowns and perfect contour makeup were entirely gone, replaced by a standard-issue, orange prison jumpsuit and a hollow, terrified expression. She had spent her entire existence obsessing over her public image, and now her lasting legacy would be a mugshot broadcast to the very people she once desperately tried to impress. The news segment seamlessly transitioned to a humiliating piece about my father. Desmond Adams, once considered a titan of local real estate, was recently photographed working as a night shift security guard at a discount retail warehouse. The anchor continued. After declaring total bankruptcy and losing his primary estate to foreclosure, Adams was forced to seek minimum wage employment to pay his mounting legal restitution fees. A grainy poppy photograph appeared on the screen showing Desmond wearing a cheap, ill-fitting uniform, pushing a row of shopping carts through a rainy parking lot. He looked exhausted, broken, and entirely defeated. His immense patriarchal pride had been completely obliterated, leaving behind nothing but a cowardly man facing the harsh reality of the actual working-class world he had always mocked. I picked up the remote control and turned the television off. The silence in my office was incredibly peaceful. I did not feel any lingering anger or bitterness toward them anymore. I simply felt nothing. They were ghosts from a past life that no longer held any power. I turned my attention to the thick stack of quarterly financial reports resting gracefully on my desk. The numbers printed on the crisp white pages were absolutely staggering. Over the past 6 months, I had aggressively integrated Grandpa Jeremiah's massive real estate empire directly into the existing corporate structure of Apex Holdings. By combining his legendary historical assets with my modern venture capital strategies, we had successfully created the single largest Black-owned commercial conglomerate in the entire South. We were no longer just acquiring struggling tech startups or managing standard investment portfolios. We were literally shaping the economic future of the city. I flipped quickly to the section detailing our expanding philanthropic divisions. Cleaning up the massive, devastating mess Vivian had left behind at the First Mount Zion Church had been my very first priority as the new executor of the family wealth. I immediately and fully reimbursed the stolen historically Black college scholarship funds using my own private equity capital. adding a $10 million endowment to ensure the essential program would thrive for decades to come. We were now funding the educations of brilliant underprivileged youth legally, transparently, and properly. I personally read every single application essay from the talented students we sponsored. Seeing their ambition and their relentless drive reminded me of exactly why I fought so hard to survive my own extremely difficult circumstances. I was actively building sturdy ladders for the next generation, while my toxic parents had only ever focused on building walls to keep people out. A soft chime from my desktop computer gently interrupted my productive thoughts. An incoming video call notification popped up on the glowing screen, displaying a vibrant picture of a sunny, beautiful tropical beach. I clicked accept, and Grandpa Jeremiah's face appeared on the high-resolution monitor. He was wearing a bright floral shirt and a pair of dark sunglasses, holding a tall, refreshing glass of fresh orange juice. He looked at least 10 years younger, his dark skin glowing with genuine health and intense vitality. "Good morning from absolute paradise, Zora," he said, his deep, resonant voice echoing pleasantly through my premium office speakers. "The warm ocean breeze sounds perfectly magnificent today." "Good morning, Grandpa," I replied, a genuine warm smile spreading naturally across my face. "Are you fully enjoying the beautiful new property?" I had purchased a sprawling private beachfront villa for him far down in the Bahamas, completely insulating him from the chaotic, stressful fallout of the recent criminal trials. I was finally enjoying the peaceful, highly luxurious retirement he truly deeply deserved. I was entirely free from the toxic parasitic leeches that had drained his incredible energy for decades. "It is magnificent, Zora," he said, panning his camera to show the crystal-clear turquoise water rolling gently onto the pristine white sand. I just finished my long morning walk directly on the beach. No stressful board meetings, no greedy relatives constantly asking for handouts, and absolutely no hospital beds. Just perfect peace and quiet. "You really completely outdid yourself with this amazing place. You unquestionably earned it, Grandpa," I told him, resting my hands evenly on my desk. "You spent your entire life building a vast empire to provide for a family that completely forgot exactly how to be grateful. It is finally time for you to just relax completely and let me handle the heavy lifting." He looked back at the camera, his expression softening with immense, profound, beautiful pride. "You are doing much more than just handling the heavy lifting, Zora," he said. "You are boldly redefining exactly what this family name truly means." I read the recent comprehensive market reports. The newly established Scholarship Endowment Initiative is absolutely brilliant. You courageously took the absolute worst parts of our dark history and effectively transformed them into something incredibly beautiful and highly sustainable. I could not be any prouder of the remarkable woman you have completely become. We talked easily for another 20 pleasant minutes, discussing minor ongoing business updates and his exciting new plans to take up amateur watercolor painting. When we finally ended the wonderful call, the lingering warmth of his genuine, unconditional love wrapped comfortably around the entire quiet room. I reached out slowly and gently touched the polished silver-framed photograph resting securely on the corner of my desk. It was a vibrant picture of me and Grandpa Jeremiah taken directly on the very day we officially signed the massive corporate merger documents. We were both smiling brightly, standing proudly shoulder to shoulder, as powerful equals. I sat back deeply into my plush leather executive chair and took a long, deep breath, letting the profound reality of my entire journey wash completely over me. 7 long, painful years ago, I was designated as the ultimate family scapegoat. I was deemed the unwanted outcast, the stubborn disappointment, the truly ugly failure who stubbornly refused to conform to their incredibly shallow, superficial standards. I was violently, unceremoniously thrown out directly into the freezing torrential rain, with all my worldly belongings stuffed carelessly into cheap black garbage bags and a single tiny $50 bill crushed tightly in my trembling hand. They fully expected the harsh, unforgiving world to thoroughly break me. They truly believed I would eventually come crawling back, begging pathetically for their conditional scraps of fake affection and financial support. But they severely underestimated the immense depth of my resilience. The agonizing pain of their cruel rejection did not break me. It forged me into solid, absolutely unbreakable steel. I took the intense trauma they maliciously inflicted upon me and carefully weaponized it into relentless, unstoppable ambition. I refused to let their toxic narrative falsely dictate the trajectory of my life. I learned how to trust my own instincts, how to build my own tables when they refused to offer me a seat. I navigated a ruthless corporate world with cold, calculating precision. I looked out the massive window at the sprawling city below. I was no longer the frightened outcast hiding in the shadows. I am the undeniable queen of my world. My reign has officially begun, and I will never apologize for my power again.